My arrogant neighbor blocked my driveway one too many times, so I had his car towed while he was on a date with someone from Tinder. I always thought of myself as a patient person. People around me might say I'm fairly easygoing and quick to forgive small mistakes. But sometimes, there are things you just can't tolerate past a certain point. And my neighbor, a guy in his 20s, tall and incredibly arrogant, was the one who pushed me to that limit. He always parked his car right in front of my house, blocking the entire driveway. Even though I had reminded him countless times, both through words and written notes, he just kept acting like nothing was wrong. His excuse was always the same, "I'll be just a minute." But his minutes seemed to stretch into hours, 3 to 5 hours every time. Imagine every time I needed to leave, but couldn't because his car was in the way. It was so frustrating. Last week, when I got home, there it was again, this time, not just his usual parked car, but there was a girl waiting for him. He was spraying himself with cologne, getting ready to head out. That was the moment. I decided, tonight would be the night he would pay. I called the tow truck right away, no warning, no heads up. Just a quick call, and his car was towed immediately. I sat on the porch, sipping beer, watching everything unfold. About 45 minutes later, I saw the girl walking towards his house. She was dressed up, probably for their date. She knocked on the door, and he opened it with a big smile. But then, when he saw that his car was gone, his face went pale. The girl seemed a bit confused, looking around, trying to understand what was going on. He started frantically looking for his car like it had been stolen. When he started to panic and yell, I casually looked down from my porch and said, "If you're looking for your car, it was towed. You blocked my driveway again." He immediately started to argue, but before I could respond, the girl cut him off. "Wait, did you park right in front of his driveway?" He tried to explain, but she just sighed and said, "Oh my God, that's really inconsiderate." And then, without another word, she walked away. He stood there, completely bewildered. He kept looking around, trying to figure out what had happened. The girl silently walked away, not saying anything more. He couldn't accept the fact, but there was nothing he could do except look for his missing car. The next morning, I got a call from the tow company. He had rushed there, angrily demanding to get his car back. But the staff didn't show him any sympathy. "You've parked illegally too many times," they said, "now you have to pay double the usual fine." I can only imagine what he was feeling at that moment, furious, but completely helpless. That was the price for his arrogance and disregard. A few days later, I saw him standing outside his house, and this time, there was no car blocking the driveway. When he saw me, his eyes no longer held the same arrogance they once did, there was just silence. "Thanks for teaching me a lesson," he said, then turned and walked away without saying anything more. I simply nodded, feeling a sense of relief, but not really feeling any joy. After all, this was his own doing. The sense of satisfaction was real, but sometimes, I think you don't need to do anything grand. Sometimes, just holding your ground and maintaining boundaries is enough to make an arrogant person reconsider their behavior. And so, since that day, I haven't seen his car blocking my driveway again, and maybe he's finally learned that sometimes, silence is the best form of revenge. Next story 2. Am I the asshole for suing my girlfriend after she had my 1967 Impala project taken to the scrapyard? I will attempt to keep this brief. I purchased a 1967 4-door Impala in February 2019. It was my obsession. I eventually purchased my own home a few months ago, and it included a 2.5-car garage, which was ideal for the repair project I had been preparing. The garage was soon crammed with parts when I moved the automobile in. All the minor parts were in the remainder of the garage, while the body and chassis were in separate bays. I was giving this project my whole attention, giving it my all. My girlfriend moved in 2 months ago. At first, she looked encouraging, but it soon became clear to me that she detested that vehicle. I had already informed her that parking in the garage was not an option. Our 2-acre property had lots of parking spaces. The trees, the barn, hell, the backyard if she so desired. I had stated unequivocally that this car was my dream project and my passion, and I couldn't just put it together at random. However, that's when the strangeness began. I spent a few days on a work trip out of town. She was beaming when I returned. She was doing chores, preparing meals for me, and being quite kind. I initially assumed she was just glad I was home, but then I noticed something strange. Her automobile was not parked where I usually see it. She simply grinned and said, "Go check the garage," when I asked where she parked. So I did. My heart stopped when I opened the garage door. My 1967 Impala's parts were all gone. Everything I'd laboriously gathered and worked on for months, the body, the drivetrain, the chassis gone. To move everything and dispose of it at the scrapyard, she had hired workers. I was completely taken aback. Including labor, parts, and the actual vehicle, I had spent more than $11,000 on the vehicle. I was enraged. I informed her right away that I would be bringing her to court for stealing. She dismissed me as being theatrical. She remarked, "It's just an old piece of junk. You're going overboard," but I was aware of what I had. The receipts, the investment, and the memories. I informed her that it was over and that she should gather her belongings and depart. I was no longer even able to look at her. I made the decision to act when I was packing my belongings. With the receipts, the surveillance tape showing her allowing the junkyard workers to enter, and the car's title in my name, I thought I had a strong case when I hired a lawyer. Her relatives didn't comprehend. They called me repeatedly, accusing me of ruining her life because of a car. They insisted on telling me to let it go. However, I was unable to. It wasn't just about the money. I had invested a lot of money in that vehicle. It was my dream, my time, and my energy. Edit. I want to thank all of you for your tremendous support. About 20 minutes earlier, her mother called me. She said that because of a dumb automobile, I was ruining her daughter's life. I informed her that I wasn't going to overlook the fact that she had destroyed her own life. In order to proceed, I have been compiling all the necessary paperwork. To report grand larceny, I'm going to the police station. They will assist me in getting my car back. Many thanks to all of you. Update. I submitted the report after visiting the police station. I showed them the title of the car, the security footage, and all of my receipts. They promised to get in touch with everyone and try to get some or all of it back. Now it's a waiting game. A massive update. My automobile was located. As it turns out, it was concealed under a heap of scrap metal by the junkyard men. They were caught trying to hide it when the cops arrived. It was being transported on a forklift to a pile that was meticulously concealed behind other vehicles. The VIN matched my title, thus it was obviously my car, even though they claimed it was theirs. At least one junkyard employee was taken into custody by the police, who also said that they will search the entire facility for any stolen cars. Although they're working on it, they haven't been able to get in touch with my ex yet. All I have to do now is wait for my car to be returned. Since it's still evidence, the police haven't allowed me to take it yet, but at least I know it was located. Though I'm still in shock, I'm incredibly appreciative. I feel like I've gotten justice at last. I sincerely appreciate all of your help and guidance. Without you, I couldn't have completed this. This is something she will regret. While dining with my family, I discovered my own daughter was behind the scheme to steal my house and they didn't even try to hide it. John Harris is my name. I'm a 72-year-old retired forensic accountant who lives in the peaceful Phoenix, Arizona, suburbs. The desert solitude has been my constant companion for the past 5 years after the death of my wife, Marie. Sarah, my daughter, says she is concerned about my wandering around this large house by myself. She is adamant about our weekly Thursday meals because of this. She claims it's so we can spend quality time together with my grandchild. However, I've discovered that I should definitely read the fine print twice when Sarah claims anything is for my advantage. My life took a turn I never would have imagined last Thursday during one of those meticulously planned family get-togethers. With a voice tense with barely contained worry, my neighbor called me. She inquired as to whether I had guests at the house. She murmured the words that began it all in a whisper when I replied no. So why is there a moving truck in your driveway with boxes being loaded? My blood raced cold as I heard something from across the restaurant table before the alarm had a chance to fully register in my head and before I had had time to digest what she was telling me. Sarah, my daughter, and her husband, Michael, exchanged glances. It was not a worried or perplexed expression. It was the expression of two poker players who had just discovered that their cards had been viewed. Michael then burst out laughing. The sound was shrill and brief, more like a yelp than true laughter. I had spent 42 years reading people's financial misdeeds and the figures they left behind, but he caught himself in time, masking it as a cough. When I heard guilt, I recognized it. I realized then that a stranger driving a moving truck wasn't the true danger to my life. It was grabbing fries off my grandson's plate while it sat across from me. They were laughing at a man who had spent 40 years exposing fraud schemes totaling hundreds of millions of dollars, but they were unaware of this. And the most important thing a forensic accountant knows is this. No matter how cunning the crime, there is always a paper trail. They had just pointed out the exact place for me to look. It was one of those hip farm-to-table restaurants in Scottsdale, where each vegetable's emotional journey is described on the menu. Of course it had been Sarah's choice. I always paid for our Thursday meals at the fancy restaurants she usually picked. It was just another pattern I had seen but had never given any thought to until now. I saw my 6-year-old grandson, Ethan, push organic sweet potato fries around his plate while sitting in a booth made for Instagram photographs rather than comfort. Marie's eyes, that same warm hazel color that used to make my heart skip a beat, were in the guy. Observing him was a source of solace as well as an unhealed wound. Sarah occupied her phone in a discussion that I wasn't entirely involved in while she sat across from me. My daughter had developed into a stunning woman who was aware of her beauty and used it as a weapon. Michael, her husband, was sitting next to her, his arm slung over the back of her chair in a possessive manner. He lacked substance and was all flair. Despite talking about deals for millions of dollars, the real estate developer always had to borrow money for the little things. Sarah inquired without raising her eyes from her computer. More water, Dad? There was a polished tenderness in her voice that I had previously taken for real love. I said, yes, thank you, as I observed Ethan trying to construct a tower out of his fries. On the table, my phone buzzed. Emily Foster, my 18-year-old neighbor, was listed on the caller ID. Except when anything was amiss, Emily never called. As a former ER nurse, she had witnessed too much to be alarmed by trivial matters. I responded right away. Her voice broke through, hurried and clipped. John, do you now reside at home? No, I responded, gripping the phone more tightly. Sarah and I are having lunch. Why? What's going on? She said, there's a moving truck in your driveway. And when she looked out her window, I could hear her curtains rustling. A large, crude one. They are now moving boxes out of your home. I'm observing them. Have you hired movers? The world swayed. My home. Marie's home. It was being emptied, the repository of all the memories of our 45-year marriage. I got up so quickly that I tipped my water glass over. Like escaping witnesses, ice cubes were strewn all over the table. I must leave, Sarah. I have a visitor at my place. Things are being taken by someone. Alarm was what I anticipated. I was expecting my daughter to leap up, grab her keys, and offer to take me home right away. Instead, I caught that look, that fleeting glance between Michael and Sarah that was full of significance I wasn't supposed to see. Then Michael chuckled. It was incorrect. It was all wrong. The tone, the timing, the way he sought to repress it right away. With a theatrical hammering of his chest, he transformed it into a coughing fit. Wrong pipe, he stammered, tears in his eyes. It's probably simply a delivery vehicle at the wrong location, so I'm sure it's nothing. I'm sorry, Dad. Sarah nodded a bit too hastily. You know how those GPS systems get confused in your neighborhood? He's correct. Do you recall when Amazon left that patio furniture at the Henderson's place? My daughter's eyes flashed with fright, but it was immediately covered up. Let's just complete our lunch and then we can all go check together. For 42 years, I made a living by catching people in lies they didn't even realize they were telling. I could read guilt in the way someone held a coffee cup, spot deception in the spacing of numbers on a spreadsheet, and right now, every instinct I had developed over 40 years of forensic work was screaming that my daughter knew exactly what was happening at my house. Michael's laugh was like a man watching a house of cards start to wobble. I felt their eyes on me the entire time, and I knew with cold certainty that I wasn't just driving home to look into a break-in, but that I was driving toward the revelation that would shatter everything I believed I knew about my family. I left money on the table, kissed Ethan on the head, and left the restaurant without turning around. By the time I got there, the moving truck was gone, replaced by a blank, empty space that felt almost tangible. As I stood in my driveway, looking at the tire prints on the concrete, I experienced my first real panic attack. Emily greeted me at my front door, her face lined with concern. She replied, I got photos, as she pressed her phone against my palm. The men carrying boxes, the vehicle, and the registration plate. I was at a loss for what to do. My fingers shook as I browsed through her photos. I didn't recognize the corporate logo on the uniforms of the professional movers. Premier Relocations in Phoenix. I didn't know what was in the dozen or more boxes they had packed into the vehicle. 20 minutes later, the police showed up. My statement was received with patient contempt by two officers who were both young enough to be my grandchildren. They looked for prints but couldn't find any. After looking through my locks, they discovered no evidence of forced entry. The first flaw in what I believed to be true emerged when they examined the security system I had put in place following Marie's death. The senior officer scowled at her iPad and muttered, Sir, records from the security firm indicate that yesterday at 2:47 p.m., your system was disabled, utilizing the master code. Additionally, at 10:15 a.m. this morning, the front door was unlocked, with the master code as well. We're demonstrating authorized access. Permitted. Like smoke, the word hung in the air. I said, I haven't shared my code with anyone. However, I knew they weren't totally accurate even while I was saying them. Sarah offered to check on the house while I was at a doctor's appointment last year, so I gave it to her. Since she was my daughter and I had entire faith in her, I had given it to her. The officers gave me the kind of pitying glances people give to bewildered elderly men, advised me to reset my codes, and advised me to inventory my possessions to see what had been taken. I could see it in their eyes even though they didn't say it. They believed this to be a family issue. They believed that my daughter had most likely simply borrowed a few items without asking. And perhaps I might have accepted that explanation if I had been a different kind of man. However, I had followed the money for 42 years, tracking down the unseen strands of fraud in both personal and corporate accounts. I was aware that crimes are not isolated incidents. They have histories, roots, and patterns. A moving truck pulling into my driveway wasn't the beginning of whatever was going on here. I was going to discover it, because it had begun somewhere else earlier in a moment I hadn't realized was important. With the systematic attention of a crime scene investigator, I strolled through my home after the cops had departed. What was missing was not what I was searching for. Not quite yet. What was different was what I sought. There had been a disturbance at my home office desk. Only someone who has been sitting at that desk for 35 years would notice the subtle signals, nothing overt. My chair was not at the proper angle. The direction of the pens in my holder was incorrect. My filing cabinet's thin covering of dust had been disturbed. Streaks that resemble fingers that are visible in the afternoon light. My papers had been being combed over by someone who had taken their time, who had not felt the need to disappear or hurry. With my heart racing, I opened the filing cabinet. My fingers located the property documents folder, and I took it out with a sensation of dread that was well-founded. The folder weighed too much. There were half the missing paperwork. The house's original deed is no longer there. I've lost my copy of the title insurance. The documentation for the home equity line of credit that Marie and I had obtained and fully paid off 18 years prior is no longer there. A single sheet of paper that I had never seen before took their place. My signature was at the bottom of a quitclaim deed that was notarized and witnessed, and it was dated 4 months ago and transferred title of my residence to a company named Harris Family Holdings LLC. I hadn't signed it, though. I had never heard of Harris Family Holdings LLC, and I had never consented to sell the house in which I had spent 40 years of my life. My most recent property tax assessment valued the house at $1.6 million. I could hardly grasp the paper since my hands were shaking so much. However, my mind was already working quickly because of decades of forensic analytical training. A home is not sold via a quitclaim deed. It typically occurs between family members or into trusts and transfers ownership without any financial exchange. It's a typical estate planning tool. It is frequently used in elder financial abuse as well. Someone had hijacked my house and forged my signature, and that someone most likely understood my filing system, had my security code, and was at ease enough in my house to spend time looking through my papers. I saw the image of my daughter's face, and then I heard Michael laugh nervously. No, like a tide hitting rocks, the notion kept coming back even after I pushed it away. I didn't get any sleep that night. I was doing what I had been doing for 42 years, sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop and a legal pad. I went where the money led. I started by looking for the county recorder's office online. Property records are made public in Arizona, and in a matter of minutes, my worst suspicions were validated. 4 months ago, my house was transferred to Harris Family Holdings LLC, according to Maricopa County records. I had previously worked on corporate fraud cases involving Delaware shell corporations, but the LLC itself had been registered in Delaware 8 months prior, with its ownership concealed behind the state's well-known corporate privacy regulations. I was able to delve further. I then obtained my credit reports from each of the 3 credit bureaus. I felt my stomach tighten at the outcome. Someone had taken out a $700,000 home equity line of credit on my property 4 months prior. Western States Credit Union was the lender, and because the loan was marked as current, I was not the one making the payments. I had never submitted an application for this loan, signed any paperwork, or gotten any money. I looked at my financial accounts. Deposits into my pension were coming in as usual. The amount I received from Social Security was accurate. Marie and I had invested for 42 years, and the accounts remained unaffected. Everything appeared to be all right on the surface. However, I was aware that the surface was not reliable. I visited the website of Western States Credit Union and explored their online banking platform. My Social Security number was connected to the HelloLock account, which was connected to an unfamiliar email address. Someone had created an internet account with my name and contact details. 4 months ago, $700,000 was shown in the account as a single lump amount. The funds had been moved right away to a new bank account. The same external account was being used to make the payments. Just the bare minimum of payments is required to keep the loan current and prevent any issues. They were maintaining appearances while robbing my house dry. I have witnessed this type of deceitful behavior 100 times in my professional life. Make sure the payments are up to date so that nobody pays too much attention. Before the bill is due, extract the highest value and then vanish. However, who were they? Without the ability to subpoena, the Delaware LLC was a dead end. The account's email address was a generic Gmail account that could be used by anyone. I wanted a different perspective. For the following 4 hours, I went through all of the mail I had gotten over the previous 8 months. Marie used to make fun of me for the habit of keeping everything. That habit could save my life now. It was 5 months ago that I discovered it hidden in a stack. My appointment to have documents notarized on March 15th was confirmed by a letter from Arizona Notary Services. The letter wished me well with Jennifer Malloy, the notary who came to my house, and thanked me for using their mobile notary service. I had never made a notary appointment. Jennifer Malloy was a name I had never heard of. Additionally, my calendar indicated that I had been at a doctor's visit on March 15th for my yearly physical. I had been driven to that appointment by Sarah. Actually, Sarah insisted on driving me because she was concerned that I might drive myself after fasting for the blood work. Sarah was aware that I was going to be gone from home for at least 2 hours that morning. The parts were coming together, each one hurting more than the last, but suspicion wasn't enough for me. I required evidence. I considered giving Sarah a ring and going straight to her. My inner father wanted to think there was a reason, perhaps her identity had also been taken. It's possible that Michael did all of this without telling her. Perhaps I was mistaken about everything. However, my inner forensic accountant was aware of this. She would have more time to prepare, remove evidence, and create a narrative if she were confronted. Every piece of evidence suggested that my daughter had been planning this for months if she was actually doing it. She would come up with excuses, contingencies, and other tactics to make me question my own sanity. I required an ally, someone who was not obligated to my daughter and who could guide me through the legal complexity of my situation. I called the number I had carried in my wallet for 18 years the following morning. I served as an expert witness in a significant pension fund fraud case where Victor Reyes was the primary forensic accountant for the FBI. Together, we had spent 8 months in a conference room constructing the case that ultimately resulted in the federal imprisonment of 3 company leaders. 2 years ago, he retired from the FBI and started his own investigative company. Furthermore, I never imagined that I would require his help. When he responded, I added, "It's John Harris, Victor, I need your assistance." I told him everything while I sat in his downtown Phoenix office 45 minutes later. He was silent for a while after I was done. "John," he said at last. "I know this will be difficult to hear, but I must. Everything you're saying suggests that a family member is abusing elders financially. It's more often than most people realize, and the victim nearly always has complete faith in the person involved. I can tell that someone in your inner circle deliberately planned this because they utilized your security code, were familiar with your filing system, and arranged the notary on a day when you would be away from home." "I know," I answered. "All I need is your assistance in proving it." Victor gave a slow nod. "We're going to do the following. We're going to subpoena the notary services records first. Regarding who really showed up at your residence that day and signed those forms, Jennifer Malloy will need to testify. Second, we will pierce that Delaware LLC's corporate veil. This type of business is exactly what I have contacts that specialize in. Third, we will investigate the whereabouts of the $700,000 that was taken out of the credit union. There is always a trail left by money. Fourth," he stopped and looked sympathetically into my eyes. "All of this will be carried out without your daughter's knowledge. You must continue to behave normally." You must continue to behave normally. Are you able to do that?" Sarah's face at the restaurant was on my mind. That moment of terror vanished in an instant. "My entire career, I've been acting normal around criminals," I added. "I have a little more time." The most difficult weeks of my life followed. As we continued our Thursday lunches, I sat across from Sarah and Michael and struck up a conversation about Michael's allegedly successful real estate firm and Ethan's kindergarten. When Sarah showed me photos of a Hawaii vacation that must have cost thousands of dollars, I grinned. When Michael grumbled about cash flow issues, I gave him a sympathetic nod. Additionally, Victor sent me updates every night that revealed yet another aspect of the betrayal. Jennifer Malloy, the notary, had been simple to locate and break. She broke down in a matter of minutes when Victor's investigator arrived with proof that she had notarized phony paperwork. While Jennifer claimed not to notice that the alleged John Harris was a lady 3 decades younger than the photo on the ID she had supplied, she affirmed that Sarah had hired her, presented the documents, and signed my name. Although Victor's sources learned that the operating agreement had been drafted by a local lawyer called Mitchell Crane, the Delaware LLC was registered to a legal firm that focused on corporate anonymity. Upon searching court records for Mitchell Crane's other client files, we discovered Michael's name on a dozen additional shell corporations, the most of which were associated with unsuccessful real estate transactions and one civil fraud judgment that had been quietly settled. Additionally, the $700,000 had been moved to Harris Family Holdings and dispersed right away, $220,000 for Michael's credit card debt repayment, $220,000 that had just disappeared into cash withdrawals over 4 months, $100,000 into a brokerage account that displayed aggressive losing trades, and $150,000 for the down payment on a Sedona home that was named in Sarah's name alone. They were preparing to steal more, and they had already burnt through the majority of what my house was worth. Emails between Sarah and a real estate agent about the sale of my house were discovered by Victor's staff. They intended to use the bogus quitclaim deed to prove ownership and list it in 8 weeks. It was being offered for $1.5 million. Since I no longer owned my house, according to the county records, I would have no legal recourse to stop them from selling it out of my hands and keeping the money. I had to do something. Victor, however, advised patience. He said, "We have enough to prove fraud. But stopping them isn't all we desire. By putting them on record and acknowledging their actions, we want to eliminate their capacity to harm others." As he described his strategy, I understood why he had been the top forensic accountant in the agency. There was more to it than merely pursuing the money. The goal was to comprehend the psychology of those who took it. I invited Sarah and Michael to my house for dinner 3 days later. I informed them that I needed to talk to them about something crucial regarding my estate planning. When I stated those words, I kept a close eye on Sarah's face and noticed the glint of greed she attempted to conceal beneath worry. Dad. Of course. She said. Actually, we've wanted to discuss it with you to make sure everything is set up for the future. The future? She was referring to the day when I would be dead, and she would be using my money. I used Marie's recipe, which I had committed to memory during our 40 years of marriage, to make her renowned pot roast. I used our wedding china to set the table. I tried to make everything as comfortable and usual as I could. Ethan and 2 came at 6 o'clock. For a brief moment, the agony of what was going to happen nearly overcame me as my grandson rushed into my arms. He would learn as a child that his mother was a criminal. There would never be a full recovery from that wound. I couldn't let emotion stop me, though. I had work to do. I let them lead the conversation when we sat down to eat. Sarah expressed her concern about me being by myself in this large home. Michael told him about a beautiful assisted care facility he had heard about. I gave them the impression that they were succeeding because they were establishing the scene and preparing for their presentation. Sarah finally put her hand on mine over pie and coffee. Dad, she whispered in a quiet, well-rehearsed voice, we have been considering. I looked at her hand on mine and thought of the day she was born, how small her fingers had been, how fiercely I had sworn to protect her. This house is so much work for you to maintain, the yard, the pool, all those repairs, and the property taxes must be enormous. Michael and I were wondering if maybe you might consider selling it and moving somewhere more manageable. Then I recalled the fake signature on the quitclaim deed. Actually, I said steadily, I've been thinking about that, too. In fact, I've been thinking about my assets quite a bit lately. Sarah's eyes brightened as I recalled teaching her to ride a bike, walking her down the aisle, and holding Ethan for the first time. That's fantastic, Dad, Sarah murmured, as Michael leaned forward a little. We solely have your best interests in mind. I put a manila folder on the table between us and said, I know exactly what you want. Michael's hand jumped and knocked over his water glass, but I didn't move to clean up the spill, and Sarah's face went white. I just observed them, and I continued, that folder contains copies of the fraudulent quitclaim deed you filed with the county, the bank records showing the $700,000 home equity line you took out in my name, and the flat, calm voice I had used in depositions for 42 years. Sarah was crying now, but I couldn't tell if she was crying out of fear or embarrassment. The statement revealed where that money went, including the investment account, the credit card payoffs, and the Sedona house. The testimony of Jennifer Malloy, the notary you hired to witness my forged signature, and the emails between you and the real estate agent who was going to sell my house in 8 weeks. This is a federal case now. Wire fraud, bank fraud, elder abuse. Victor Reyes sends his regards. Michael's face turned gray. Dad. Sarah choked out. Michael appeared to be weighing his options, his eyes darting toward the door. I told him not to try to flee. An FBI agent was parked across the street. I was just trying to protect my family, and I was going to pay it all back, I swear. I looked at my daughter, at this woman I had loved unconditionally for 45 years, and I felt something shift inside of me. The father who had held her hand on her first day of school, who had danced with her at her wedding, who had cried with joy when Ethan was born. Please, you don't understand. We were desperate. Michael's business failed. We were going to lose everything. I said quietly, you weren't trying to protect your family, you were trying to steal from it. There's a difference. That father was still there, but the forensic accountant who had spent a lifetime observing people attempt to defend their crimes, was now sitting next to him. The following hour was a flurry of activity. This wasn't a one-time desperate act. Michael had been running variations of this scheme for years, targeting vulnerable investors and elderly relatives. In the weeks that followed, the full scope of their plan became clear. Federal agents arrived with Victor's team, read their rights to Sarah and Michael, and held Ethan while strangers took his parents away. The federal prosecutors offered Michael a deal if he would testify about the other people involved in his various schemes, and he accepted it. Sarah had been his partner from the start, and they had already defrauded Michael's aunt in Florida out of $350,000 and were preparing to target Sarah's cousins in Oregon next. Victor's contacts in the financial services industry helped me freeze my credit and secure my accounts against future attacks. When faced with the overwhelming amount of evidence against her, Sarah pled guilty to avoid a trial and was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison, while Michael received 6 years. The fraudulent liens were removed, and my house was returned to my name. Ethan now lives with Marie's sister, my sister-in-law, who had always been suspicious of Michael and is providing him with the stability he needs. The money they had stolen was mostly gone, but the sale of the Sedona house and the seizure of their other assets recovered about $220,000. It wasn't enough to make me whole, and nothing would ever make me whole again, but it was justice. I spend every weekend with him, and I tell him stories about his grandmother, about the woman who would have loved him so much that it would have made him gasp. I don't tell him the truth about his mother, not yet, but I let him think that his parents made some poor choices and are now paying the price. My Thursday lunches are still with my neighbor Emily and Victor, who has become an unusual friend, and we sit in that same farm-to-table restaurant in Scottsdale and talk about golf, grandchildren, the weather, and other normal, safe topics. That's pretty near to the reality. It's not grief, it's not satisfaction, it's something colder and more permanent, like a scar that has healed but never stops hurting. This whole experience taught me something I wish I had learned without such a painful lesson. Sometimes I think about Sarah in her prison cell and I feel something I can't quite put my finger on. Unconditional love is a beautiful thing, but unconditional trust is dangerous. You can love someone unconditionally and still be sure of what they tell you. You can protect your family from their worst tendencies while still loving them completely. I also learned that retirement does not mean your skills are no longer useful. I followed the money and caught the thieves for 42 years, and I thought those days were over, but when the crime was committed at my own door by my own blood, those same skills saved everything I had worked so hard to build. Some people may ask me if I regret turning in my own daughter, and others may argue that family loyalty should have taken precedence over justice and that blood should have shielded her from consequences. My answer is straightforward. I owed her my love, and I will always love the girl she was, but I didn't owe her my house, my security, or my silence. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Please share your thoughts in the comments section below. She ceased to be my daughter the moment she decided I was merely an asset to be liquidated. Please contact your local adult protective services if you or someone you know is worried about elder financial abuse. The perpetrators rely on shame and familial devotion to keep their victims quiet, so don't allow them get away with it. My spoiled mother flirted with every boyfriend I had because she hated seeing me get attention, until my gay friend helped me teach her a lesson. I'm Clara Moreau. I'm 26 and have been living with this nightmare for the past 7 years. Every single guy I've brought home has received the full treatment from my mother, including lingering hugs, inappropriate compliments about how handsome they are, and the sudden urge to wear her tightest outfits whenever they visit. But 4 months ago, I determined to do something about it. I was weary of seeing prospective relationships go apart, because my mother couldn't accept the notion that someone might want to be with me instead of her. So I devised a scheme that was either amazing or absolutely nuts. I was planning to introduce her to a fictitious boyfriend. The whole thing began with my most recent ex, Daniel Reed. He was a nice, genuine person who worked as a teacher at an elementary school near my apartment. We had been dating for approximately 5 months when I finally mustered the confidence to invite him home for Sunday supper. My mother, Vivian Hale, was 54 and yet looked lovely. She'd been a model in her 20s and made sure no one forgot. Even now, she spends 2 hours every morning on her hair and makeup, works out with a personal trainer 4 days a week, and has a closet full of outfits that cost more than most people's rent. Daniel went through the door, and I could see the calculation in her eyes. "Oh my goodness, Clara, you didn't tell me how handsome he was," she said, drawing Daniel into an embrace that lasted far too long. "I can see why you're so smitten." During dinner, she bombarded him with questions about his career, hobbies, and family. Typical getting-to-know-you questions, except for the fact that she kept caressing his arm and giggling at everything he said as if it was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. "You know, Clara never brings anyone home," she told him as I was in the kitchen getting dessert. I was starting to worry she'd never find someone good enough for her. When I returned with a pie, Daniel looked uneasy, and my mother was nearly glowing. After he departed, she cornered me in the corridor. "He seems nice, honey," she said in a tone that indicated she was about to say something sharp. "Maybe a little simple for you though. I mean, elementary school teacher. You could probably do better." This was her pattern. First, she'd flirt with them to see whether they'd respond to her advances. Then she'd plant doubts in my mind about their suitability for me. Meanwhile, she'd begin texting them directly, making excuses to invite them over while I wasn't around. It had worked for my last 3 boyfriends. They'd all become bewildered and overwhelmed by my mother's strange dynamic, and instead of dealing with it, they'd simply fade away. But Daniel was different. He told me exactly what was going on. "Your mom has been texting me," he explained 3 weeks after the event. We were seated in his living room, and he appeared distressed. "What kind of texts?" He showed me his phone, which had messages from my mother inquiring about his weekend plans, informing him about yoga classes he would love, and that they meet for coffee to discuss Clara's happiness. "She says she wants to make sure I'm treating you right," he said. "But some of these messages feel weird." As I scrolled through them, my stomach sank. She was being subtle, but I could see exactly what she was doing. Opening a private communication channel and posing herself as the concerned mother who only wanted the best for me. "I don't want to cause problems between you and your family," Daniel said me. "But this feels inappropriate." "It is inappropriate," I replied. "And I'm so sorry. This is exactly why I don't usually introduce guys to her." Has this happened before? Every single time. Daniel was silent for a long time. Clara, that's not normal. You know that, right? Yes, I was aware of this. I had known it for years. However, knowing something is wrong and being able to correct it are not the same thing. Daniel ended our relationship 4 days later. I really care about you, he stated. But I can't handle your mother. The constant texts. The way she looks at me. The things she says about us. It's too much. I cried for several hours after he went. Not only had I lost another nice guy, but I realized I was going to be alone for the rest of my life until I figured out how to deal with my mother. That's when I devised a false boyfriend scheme. I needed someone who could deal with my mother's manipulative tactics, not someone who was flattered or intimidated by her attention. Someone who could give her a reality check without becoming emotionally attached. The trouble was that I did not know anyone like that. Then I recalled Luca Marin. Luca and I were buddies in college but had lost touch after graduation. He was studying theater at the time, with the goal of becoming an actor, and he was stunning. Tall, black hair, green eyes, and a grin that compelled teachers to give him extensions on papers he had never written. Luca was also gay, though he hadn't revealed it in college. We had kept in touch through social media, and I had seen his tweets about coming out to his family and moving in with his boyfriend, Nicholas Verne. More significantly, Luca was the type of person who enjoyed drama and had no patience for deceptive individuals. I messaged him about my condition, and to my surprise, he was immediately intrigued. "Oh honey, this sounds like the most fun I've had in months," I said. "Nicholas is going to love hearing about this. When do we start?" We met for coffee the following weekend to plan things out. Luca was much more handsome than he had been in college, and he exuded a confident attitude that I knew would drive my mother wild. "So, what's the goal here?" he inquired. "Are we trying to make her back off, or are we going full revenge mode?" "I just want her to leave my actual relationships alone," I told her. "If she's focused on you, maybe she'll stop sabotaging my real dating life." "Got it. So, I need to be charming enough to get her attention, but unavailable enough to frustrate her." "Exactly." We figured out our backstory. We had reconnected through common acquaintances, had been dating for 3 months, and were growing serious. Luca would be attentive but not overly affectionate. Successful, but not flashy. I am interested in her viewpoint but do not seek her approval. The secret, according to Luca, is to make her feel like she's competing against you. Like I might choose her if she plays her cards right. That sounds terrible. It is terrible, but it's also exactly how her brain works, right? She can't stand the idea that you have something she can't have. 3 weeks later, I brought Luca home for dinner. My mother answered the door in a dress I had never seen before, and her hair and makeup were flawless. She took one look at Luca, and I could see her pupils widen. "You must be Luca," she murmured, offering her hand and expecting him to kiss it. "Clara has told me so much about you." "All good things, I hope," Luca answered, flashing her the $1,000,000 smile. "And you must be Vivian." Clara definitely didn't mention how beautiful her mother is. I watched my mother almost dissolve. She giggled like a teenager and led us into the living area, immediately assuming hostess mode. Luca was very masterful during supper. He inquired about my mother's modeling career, complimented her food, and listened closely as she told stories about the intriguing individuals she had met over the years. However, he maintained one hand on my knee under the table and made an effort to engage me in all conversations. "Clara's so lucky to have such an interesting mother," he told me. "I can see where she gets her confidence from." My mother was virtually beaming. "Oh, Clara's always been so shy. I keep telling her she needs to put herself out there more." "I think Clara's perfect exactly as she is," Luca replied, squeezing my hand. "But I'd love to hear more about your modeling days." That must have been such an adventure. My mother spent the next hour telling us stories that I'd heard 1,000 times before. Luca laughed at the appropriate times, asked follow-up questions, and made her feel like the most interesting person in the world. After dinner, I could hear them conversing in the living room as I loaded the dishwasher. Luca inquired about her gym program and skincare regimen, claiming she appeared at least 10 years younger than her age. "Clara's so lucky to have someone who appreciates quality," my mother said. "I definitely appreciate quality," Luca said, and I could detect a smile in his voice. When we left that night, my mother hugged Luca goodbye and told him he was always welcome. "She likes you," I said as we drove away. "Oh, she more than likes me. Did you see her face when I complimented her dress? She's already planning our affair." "That's disgusting. That's your mother." Over the next 3 weeks, Luca's plan worked flawlessly. Within a few days of that first supper, my mother began contacting him, initially with harmless messages asking how work was doing and sharing things she thought he would be interested in. Luca showed me each message and carefully planned his reply to keep her engaged but not completely satisfied. He was nice but not flirtatious, grateful but not pursuing. Meanwhile, my mother began treating me differently. She was gentler to me while Luca was present, almost as if she was trying to demonstrate what a fantastic mother she was. She stopped making snide remarks about my appearance or my employment, and she appeared to listen when I spoke. "She's performing for him," Luca said. "She wants me to see her as this amazing, supportive mother, so I'll think she's relationship material." It was so effective that I almost forgot it was a hoax. My mother then escalated. She began making reasons to visit my flat when she realized Luca would be there. She'd deliver items I hadn't asked for, or say she was in the neighborhood and wanted to say hello. Always dressed to the nines and carrying a small present or treat for Luca. "Your mother brought me homemade cookies," Luca said during one of her surprise visits. "She stayed for 2 hours, talking about how worried she is that you're not eating enough." "What did you tell her?" "I told her I'm making sure you're well taken care of." That seemed to frustrate her. The breaking point occurred 8 weeks into our fictitious romance. My mother contacted me on Tuesday afternoon crying. "Clara, I need to tell you something," she sobbed into the phone. "I think I'm falling in love with Luca." My stomach sank. "Mom, what are you talking about? I know it's wrong. I know he's your boyfriend. But I can't help how I feel. He's just so wonderful, and he really understands me in a way that most men don't." "Mom, you've known him for 8 weeks. Sometimes that's all it takes. Look, I don't want to hurt you, but I think Luca might have feelings for me too. The way he looks at me, the things he says. I think he's just staying with you because he doesn't want to hurt your feelings." I had been quiet for so long that she wondered if I was still present. "I'm here," I announced finally. "Maybe we should all sit down and talk about this like adults," she said later. "I think if we're honest about our feelings, we can figure out what's best for everyone." That night I called Luca and explained what had transpired. "She wants to have a conversation about feelings," he told me. "Oh, this is perfect. Perfect. Luca, this is nightmare territory. She's completely lost her mind." "No, this is exactly what we wanted. She's so obsessed with the idea of stealing your boyfriend that she's willing to blow up your relationship to get him. Now we can show her exactly how it feels." "What do you mean?" "Trust me. Set up that conversation this weekend at your place. Tell her we'll all discuss the situation honestly." I didn't like the expression in Luca's eyes, but I was too involved in this mess to pull out now. Saturday evening my mother arrived at my apartment dressed as if she were going to a red carpet event. Tight black dress, complete makeup, and hair arranged in perfect waves. She brought a bottle of pricey wine and a tense vibe that permeated the entire space. Luca had come an hour earlier and we'd spent the time discussing his idea. I still wasn't sure, but I trusted him to handle the problem. "Vivienne," Luca replied, standing to greet her with an embrace. "You look absolutely stunning," my mother almost purred. "Thank you, Luca. You look pretty handsome yourself." We sat in the living room, forming an odd triangle with my couch and chairs. My mother continued looking between Luca and me, as if she were trying to read the room. "So," she finally replied. "I think we all know why we're here." "We do," Luca said. "And I want you to know how much I appreciate your honesty, Vivienne. It takes courage to admit your feelings." My mother's face lightened up. "I'm so glad you understand. I was worried you'd think I was terrible." "Not at all. In fact, I think this conversation is long overdue." Luca reached over and grabbed my hand, which surprised my mother. "The thing is," Luca went on, "I need to be honest about my feelings too." "Of course," my mother replied, leaning forward hopefully. "Vivienne, you're an absolutely incredible woman. Beautiful, intelligent, sophisticated. Any man would be lucky to have your attention." My mother was shining. "But I'm completely, utterly head over heels in love with Clara." My mother's face fell. "More than that," Luca added, "I'm gay." The silence was terrible. My mother's mouth moved like a fish. "I'm sorry. What?" she finally said. "I'm gay, Vivienne. I have been my entire life. I have a boyfriend named Nicholas, who I've been with for 4 years. Clara and I have been pretending to date because she was tired of you sabotaging her real relationships." My mother gazed back and forth between us, her expression shifting between confusion, embarrassment, and wrath. "This is a joke," she explained. "It's not a joke," Luca replied calmly. Clara asked me to help her because she was losing every good guy she met to your interference. She thought if you were focused on me, you might leave her actual dating life alone. You've been lying to me for 3 months. You've been lying to yourself for years, responds Luca. Vivienne, do you really think it's normal to compete with your own daughter for male attention? Do you really think it's healthy to sabotage her relationships because you can't handle not being the center of attention? My mother rose abruptly. I don't have to listen to this. No, you don't, Luca confirmed. But maybe you should. For the first time in years, she looked at me with genuine hurt in her eyes. How could you do this to me? She inquired. How could I do this to you? I insisted. Mom, you've chased away every guy I've dated since I was 19. You flirt with them. You text them behind my back. You make them feel guilty for being with me instead of giving you attention. You've sabotaged 7 years of my dating life. I never sabotaged anything. If those boys couldn't handle a little friendly attention from your mother, then they weren't good enough for you anyway. Friendly attention? Said Luca, laughing. Vivienne, you asked me to meet you for coffee 3 times. You sent me shirtless photos from your yoga class. You told me you thought Clara and I were settling for each other. My mother's face turned white. I never sent you shirtless photos. Luca took out his phone and showed her the messages. My mother had indeed sent him multiple images from her yoga sessions, dressed in sports bras and tight leggings, with captions about how exercise kept her youthful. Those weren't shirtless, she said faintly. Vivienne, said Luca, you're a beautiful woman, but you're also old enough to be my mother. This behavior isn't flattering, it's sad. That's when my mother totally lost it. She began shouting about how we had embarrassed her, made her appear foolish, and how she would never forgive any of us. She flung the wine bottle against the wall, calling me an ungrateful daughter and accusing Luca of being a pervert for leading her on. I'm leaving, she said dramatically. And don't expect me to speak to you again anytime soon, Clara. Maybe when you grow up and learn how to treat your mother with respect. She stormed away, slamming the door so fiercely that my neighbor's dog began barking. Luca and I sat in startled silence for several minutes. That went better than expected, he concluded. Better? She threw a bottle at my wall. But she's not going to bother your next boyfriend. Trust me, she's way too embarrassed to pull her usual routine after this. Luca was correct, but not in the way either of us imagined. My mother did not contact me for the following 4 weeks. No calls, texts, or surprise visits. It was the longest we'd gone without talking since I moved out of her place. I was starting to believe I had finally gotten through to her. That the shock of being called out in public made her realize how improper her behavior had been. I then received a call from my Aunt Caroline, my mother's sister. Clara, honey, I need to tell you something about your mother, she whispered. She's been staying with me since your fight, and she's been telling everyone a very different version of what happened. What do you mean? According to Vivienne, you brought home a gay man and pretended he was your lover out of jealousy for the attention he was providing her. She claims you planned the entire situation to embarrass her because you can't stand the fact that men find her attractive. My blood became chilly. That's not what happened. I know that, honey. But she's been calling everyone in the family, all her friends, even some people at your work. She's painting herself as the victim of some cruel prank you pulled because you're jealous and immature. I felt nauseous. This is exactly what my mother would do if she couldn't manipulate the narrative. She would alter history completely. There's more, Caroline added. She's been posting about it on Facebook. Nothing that names you directly, but anyone who knows your family will be able to figure out what she's talking about. Posts about how hard it is when your own children turn against you. How some daughters can't handle their mothers being attractive. I spent the rest of the day taking calls and texts from family who wanted to hear my side of the story. Some of them believed me, while others seemed to think my mother's story had to be true. The saddest part was witnessing how she misrepresented everything on social media. She'd written cryptic notes about family betrayal, shared articles about narcissistic children abusing their parents, and received dozens of sympathetic responses from people who had no idea what had transpired. She's doing exactly what she did to your boyfriends, Luca observed when I contacted him in tears. She's controlling the narrative to make herself look like the victim. I can't fight this, I said. She's too good at this game. Maybe you don't have to fight it. What do you mean? I mean, maybe it's time to let her win this round. She wants to play the victim. Let her. But that means she also has to live with the consequences of what she's claiming happened. I had no idea what Luca meant until the next day, when I received a call from my cousin Sophie. Clara, I've been thinking about what your mom told everyone, she muttered. And I have to ask you something. If Luca really was just a friend helping you out, why would your mother have been flirting with him in the first place? What do you mean? I mean, according to her story, she was just being friendly to your boyfriend, and you got jealous and decided to humiliate her. But if Luca is gay and you knew that, why would she have any reason to feel embarrassed about being friendly to him? I could hear Sophie's thoughts turning. The only way her story makes sense, says Sophie, is if she was doing something inappropriate that made the revelation embarrassing. Otherwise, finding out your daughter's boyfriend is gay would just be funny, not humiliating. Other family members began asking the same questions. The more people considered my mother's account of events, the less sense it made. Why would I go to such lengths to embarrass her if she hadn't done anything wrong? Why would she be so distraught over being duped if her contacts with Luca had been entirely innocent? Why was she sticking with Caroline rather than simply laughing at a minor prank? Within a week, the family's narrative began to twist. People began questioning my mother about what she had said and done to make Luca's admission so embarrassing. She couldn't explain it without confessing her wrong actions. Meanwhile, I began dating again. Ethan Clark was a lawyer I met through a mutual friend at work. I was completely open with him about my family situation from the start, and to my surprise, he found the entire story amusing rather than concerning. So, your mother has been sabotaging your relationships, and you got a gay actor to pretend to be your boyfriend to teach her a lesson? He asked on our third dinner date. That's either the most brilliant thing I've ever heard or the most insane. Probably both. I like it. It shows creativity and problem-solving skills. Ethan was different from the other guys I'd dated. He was more confident, more established in his life, and less inclined to be scared by family drama. When I finally introduced him to my mother 7 months later, the situation was drastically different. She attempted her typical routine, but Ethan promptly shut it down. "Vivian, it's so nice to meet Clara's mother," he replied, taking one of her long hugs. "Clara talks about you all the time." However, when she began asking personal questions about his profession and family, Ethan switched the topic back to me. "Clara didn't tell me she was interested in art history," he'd often comment. "When my mother mentioned my college major, tell me more about what drew you to that field, Clara." When my mother attempted to dominate his attention, Ethan sweetly but firmly included me in every conversation. "That's such an interesting perspective, Vivian. Clara, what do you think about that?" By the end of the evening my mother was frustrated and perplexed. Her typical techniques were failing, and Ethan made it apparent that he was there to see me, not be charmed by her. After that supper, she seldom tried to interfere with our relationship. She'd still make the occasional comment about how Ethan was fine, or how she hoped I wasn't taking things too seriously too soon, but the aggressive flirting and inappropriate messaging never happened. Ethan and I got engaged 3 years later. When we told my family, my mother's reaction was telling. "Well, I suppose he's acceptable," she replied. "Though I still think you're both very young to be making such a big decision." We were 29 and 33. But here's what continues to astound me about this issue. My mother never admitted what she had been doing to my previous relationships. Even after everything that happened with Luca, and after the family confronted her about her inappropriate behavior, she refused to admit that she had been sabotaging my dating life. In her perspective, she had been the victim of a terrible joke rather than the perpetrator of years of emotional manipulation. And in a strange way, that was the ideal outcome. Because my mother's incapacity to see herself clearly contributed to the success of Luca's strategy. She was so intent on sustaining her victim narrative that she couldn't risk acting the same way with Ethan if she began flirting with another of my boyfriends. It would undercut her claim to be the injured party in the Luca case. Her own narcissism had compelled her to behave better. Wedding planning was its own journey. My mother attempted to take over various parts of the occasion, claiming that we needed a larger venue, a more costly photographer, and flowers that were more photogenic. But Ethan had ideas on everything, and he wasn't afraid to share them. "Vivian, I appreciate your input, but Clara and I have already decided on the menu," he'd remark when she proposed modifying the catering. Or it may be, "That's an interesting idea, but we're happy with our photographer." She couldn't flirt her way into getting what she wanted, and she couldn't influence Ethan like she had with my prior relationships. For the first time in my adult life, I had a partner who was utterly unaffected by my mother's tactics. The wedding itself was stunning. My mother behaved appropriately, though she did manage to wear a dress that was perhaps too eye-catching for a mother of the bride. Ethan's family adored me. My friends were overjoyed to finally meet the guy I'd been talking about, and my extended family was glad to see me with someone who clearly appreciated me. During the reception, my mother delivered a nice and appropriate speech. She talked about how proud she was of me. How glad she was to see me with someone who valued me, and how excited she was to welcome Ethan into the family. For a moment I believed she had finally transformed. Then, during the bouquet toss, she positioned herself in the middle of all the single women, catching my flowers. "Looks like I'm next," she said to the audience, winking at Ethan's unmarried brother. Certain things never change. But here's what I learned from the whole experience. You can't heal a narcissistic parent by approaching them directly. They will simply rework the story to make themselves the victim. You can't change them by being a better daughter or saying the proper things to make them see how their actions affect you. What you can do to protect yourself is choose partners who will not fall for their manipulation and set boundaries to prevent their dysfunction from undermining your happiness. Luca's fake boyfriend idea did not cure my mother's narcissism, but it did demonstrate to her that her usual tactics would not work on everyone, forcing her to change her behavior. Just enough to allow us to have a normal relationship. That was perhaps the finest result I could have asked for. Ethan and I have been married for 4 years now. We have a 2-year-old daughter named Elena, and my mother is completely obsessed with being a grandmother. She babysits Elena twice a week, buys her more clothes than any baby could ever need, and constantly publishes images of them together on social media. Sometimes I notice her staring at Ethan, as if she's still calculating if she can capture his attention if she really tries. But then Elena will do something cute, and my mother will be entirely sidetracked by the chance to be the focus of a baby's universe. I believe grandchildren could be the ideal remedy for narcissistic mothers. They receive unconditional adulation from someone who is too young to see through their deception, and they feel important and needed without having to compete with their grown-up offspring. Luca and Nicholas got married last year. I was a bridesmaid at their wedding, and my mother was invited as my guest. She spent the entire reception attempting to connect Luca's single friends with ladies she knew, obviously forgetting that the reason we met was because he was gay. "Clara, you should introduce that nice tall one to your cousin Isabel," she said quietly during the cocktail hour. "He seems like he'd be perfect for her." "Mom, they're all gay. It's a gay wedding." "Well, you never know. Sometimes people experiment." I just laughed. Despite everything we'd been through, my mother remained my mother. Gorgeous, charming, and unable to view the world through anybody else's eyes. But she was no longer capable of destroying my relationships. And that was enough. The most essential thing I took up from this entire experience is that you don't have to fix your family to be happy. You simply need to figure out how to protect yourself from their worst inclinations while keeping whatever relationship is possible. My mother will most likely always be a narcissist. She'll probably always need to be the center of attention, and she'll struggle to accept that other people's wants and feelings are just as important as her own. But she will probably always be my mama, and despite everything, I still love her. I just love myself enough to not let her ruin my happiness in the process. And sometimes that's all you can ask for from a problematic family situation. The phony boyfriend plan was successful not because it changed my mother, but because it changed me. It showed me that I could take control of seemingly hopeless situations, that I could protect myself without fully cutting ties, and that sometimes the best retribution is simply refusing to be a victim. My mother still believes she did nothing wrong with my prior boyfriends. She continues to believe her version of the Luca narrative, in which she was the innocent victim of a nasty daughter's jealousy. But she also understands that her typical tactics do not work on Ethan, and she has seen what happens when she goes too far. That's probably as near to a happy ending as our relationship will ever come, and honestly, I'm fine with that. A psychopath saved a life, but no one believed it. Noah Walsh, the guy everyone muttered about in the corridors, had just been labeled an unofficial concerning student by his guidance counselor after a psychological evaluation went wrong. So he decides to celebrate by going around the ancient cemetery. Because nothing says regular like hanging out with the dead, right? He notices a little child sitting completely still near a tomb, not weeping or playing, just sitting there like a tiny statue. Most people would think of seeing grandma, but Noah's intellect immediately recognizes that something is horribly wrong here. He comes up and asks whether she's okay. She glances up with hazy eyes and murmurs, "I can't remember how to get home." She has been sitting there since the morning, and it is almost dark now. Noah sees she is severely dehydrated. He phones 911, remains with her and shares his water bottle. Paramedics arrive and find she is in critical medical distress. She'd strayed away from her babysitter some hours earlier and was gradually shutting down in the heat. Everyone else had moved past, figuring she was okay. But here's what really bothers me. Noah is categorized as lacking empathy the same week. He was the only one who stopped to help a dying child. The girl's parents attempted to thank him, but Noah had already vanished back into the cemetery. The paramedic later stated that Noah seemed to see things that others did not. I couldn't stop crying after a strange kid called me mom. I'd taken my children to the local library's weekend play hour. They were preparing a puppet performance in the children's area, which I thought would be a great break for everyone. My 3 little ones quickly settled in, sitting on the carpet with a few other kids, whispering and giggling as the concert began. I perched on the edge, relieved to have a peaceful moment. A few minutes in, my children started turning to wave and murmur, "Hi, Mom," anytime they noticed me looking, and I'd smile and wiggle my fingers back. I observed a youngster I didn't recognize sitting nearby. He was tiny, about 3 or 4 years old. After a few waves from my children, he began waving shyly at me and softly calling out, "Mom." At first, I assumed he mistook me for someone else. But when I smiled at him, he lit up like I had just given him the moon. He repeated it every few minutes, waiting for my reaction, and I smiled back. I didn't want to offend anyone, so I looked around to see who he might be with, but no one came forward. When the play concluded and I was gathering our jackets, a woman approached and introduced herself as one of the coordinators. She informed me that the little kid was staying with a temporary foster home and had arrived with a volunteer. Then she remarked gently, "He's had a difficult few weeks, and I believe that moment meant more than you realize." As we departed, I hugged my kids a little tighter, wiping away tears I didn't want to show. Am I a jerk for not inviting my mother to my wedding, but inviting my stepmother? My real mother left when I was 8 to find herself in California with a guy called Dylan Hayes, who sold essential oils at farmers markets. Meanwhile, my stepmother, Helen Carter, arrived 2 years later and physically taught me how to tie my shoes, assisted with homework, attended every soccer game, and pulled my hair back during my first hangover in high school. However, according to half of my family, DNA outweighs turning up for someone's life. My mother emerged after 15 years of radio silence, wanting to play Mother of the Bride because, quote, "It's my right as your real mother," entirely ignoring the fact that she had missed every birthday, graduation, and heartbreak in the interim. Helen never claimed to be replacing someone. Instead, she quietly became the person who was there when I needed them the most. But here's where everyone's calling me the jerk. I gave Helen the invitation with Mother of the Bride inscribed on it, but my biological mother received a generic +1 to the reception alone. Expect family drama and guilt trips about blood being thicker than water. But do you know what the complete quotation is? The blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb, implying that the family you select is stronger than the one you are born into. Helen earned her front row seat by consistently turning up for 18 years, not by sharing my DNA for 9 months. Sometimes being the jerk entails respecting the folks who truly loved you, rather than those who simply gave birth to you. What memorable experience did you have as an anesthesiologist? Hearing from someone below. I am a nurse anesthetist. Last Tuesday, just before going under for gallbladder surgery, Mrs. Beaumont abruptly grabbed my wrist and whispered, "The pineapple magnet knows," where we buried the time capsule with Noah's letters. Then he said something that sounded like coordinates before walking out cold. I pondered about it all day. That night I drove past her house. Sure enough, there was a pineapple magnet on the mailbox. I followed the coordinates into her backyard, excavated where an ancient sundial had been, and discovered a rusting metal box. Over 100 letters were within, written over 16 years by her and someone named Noah, under identities such as Admiral Stargazer and Captain Nebula. Each one concluded with, "Someday, I'll tell you the truth." The next morning, I called to check on her condition and casually mentioned telescopes. She giggled quietly and continued, "I hope he remembers." He stopped writing after his father told him I wasn't his grandmother. Then she paused. "I was just the neighbor. But I loved him like he was mine. Still do." She asked that I not inform him if he ever came looking. "Let him believe it was all real," she instructed. "It was real to me." I suggested she examine her garden shortly. She became quiet. Then she asked quietly, "So, he really kept them?" I said, "You both did." What happened to the best buddies who swore they'd never drift apart? Amelia Rhodes and I had this really elaborate tradition of attending wedding receptions together. Not for the free meal, though the salmon was typically good, but because we'd developed a game called Guess the Divorce Timeline, in which we'd examine the visitor's body language to predict which couples would not make it past their second anniversary. And guess what? We were disturbingly accurate. Anyway, last month I received this stunning wedding invitation in the mail. Thick cardstock, elegant calligraphy, the works. Amelia Rhodes warmly asks me to witness her wedding to a guy named Henry Collins at the country club we've always criticized for its aggressively beige decor. But the thing that still gets to me? Amelia never mentioned someone named Henry. And we were continuously talking about everything, including her ongoing battle with the grocery store employee who commented on her frozen pizza selections. So I call her, anticipating an explanation about the mystery Henry, and she remains utterly mute. Then she says, "Oh, you got the invitation." Little did I know Amelia had been engaged for 8 months to a guy she met at one of our wedding crashes, and she'd been too embarrassed to tell me since Henry was exactly the sort we'd spent years mocking. Khaki pants, financial portfolio conversations, the works. I showed up nonetheless, saw Amelia in her white dress, and murmured, "So how long do you think this one will last?" She began to laugh and continued, "Honestly, I've been wondering the same thing for months. I caught my husband using a dating app. He claims he was just curious. So, there I was, doing the most American thing possible, ordering DoorDash at 10 p.m. because I'm too lazy to cook. I'm scrolling through my phone, trying to decide between Thai cuisine and pizza for the 3rd time this week, when I notice my husband's phone light up with a notification on the coffee table. I respect privacy and all that adult. Now, I'm not typically the Snoopy type. Married couple stuff. But the preview featured a girl called Chloe Harper with far too many heart emojis and a message that began, "Hey, handsome." So of course I had to look into it because, what the hell? I steal his phone when he's in the toilet for 20 minutes doing who knows what, and there's an entire dating profile with photographs I've never seen before. We're talking professional level images, including one of him flexing at a premium gym to which we don't have a membership, because we can barely afford our Planet Fitness Black Card. His bio literally reads, "Recently single and ready to mingle. Looking for someone who enjoys craft beer and weekend adventures." Recently single. I've been married to this man for 7 years, and now he's an adventurous craft beer enthusiast. The guy drinks Bud Light and views going to Target as an adventure. I'm scrolling through his matches, and there are about 60 women he's been conversing with. 60. There's Lydia Grant, the yoga teacher. Clara Boyd, a real estate agent. And don't even get me started on Tessa Quinn, who supposedly sent him images that I don't want to see. My hands are absolutely shaking as I read these chats in which he tells these women that he is recently divorced and wants to explore, and I am like, news to me, buddy. When he finally gets out of the bathroom, I'm standing in the living room, gripping his phone as if I'm about to launch it through our 70-inch TV, which we're still paying for. "Babe, I can explain," he begins. I think to myself, oh, this should be good, because I'm dying to hear how you explain being on Tinder, Bumble and Hinge simultaneously while married to me. He gets this deer-in-headlights face and says, "It's not what it seems, okay? I was simply interested about what was out there. You know, like window shopping, except for humans. I wasn't going to meet anyone." I swore. "People are window shopping." I responded, "Well, congratulations, honey, because now you can stop window shopping and actually go test drive some of these models from your new apartment." The boldness of this man. He starts backtracking, saying he loves me, and it was just a silly mistake. But I'm already pulling out my phone to screenshot all of his conversations, because my divorce lawyer is going to have a field day with this proof. Do you want to know what's really wrong? I inform him as I screenshot his discussion with a 23-year-old named Ava. "You told Chloe Harper here that you're looking for someone who appreciates home-cooked meals, but you haven't eaten anything I've made in 4 months without complaining." He's attempting to reclaim his phone, but I've already forwarded everything to my email, because I'm not stupid. The expression on his face when I began dragging his Xbox toward the front door was priceless. Like I just told him Santa wasn't real. "You cannot steal my Xbox," he whines, and I'm like, "Watch me, window shopper." I packed up his gaming setup, his dumb craft beer collection, which he never drinks, and his lucky fishing hat, which makes him look like a discount Bass Pro Shop model. Curiosity not only killed the cat, but also his marriage, Xbox rights, and prospects of staying in the house with the good Wi-Fi. And yeah, I kept the house, the dog, and his Netflix password because obviously, I am petty like that. But frankly, he deserves it. Chloe and the other 59 women can have him, but they are now receiving defective goods. And good luck dealing with his habit of leaving dirty dishes in the sink and his insatiable desire to watch the same 3 Marvel movies over and over. Oh, and ladies, if you're swiping and come across a guy named Brad who says he's recently divorced and like adventure, just know that he views coming to Costco on a Saturday to be risky behavior. Have you ever received a birthday wish from Domino's but not from your bestie? It was my 28th birthday, and I was sitting alone in my studio apartment eating leftover pizza when my phone buzzed with a text message from Domino's saying, "Happy birthday, Get 25% off your next order. And for the first time in the day, I smiled, because someone remembered. My best buddy since middle school, the one who used to sleep over every weekend and knew I was afraid of the dark, the one who held my hair back at homecoming when I puked up too much Smirnoff Ice behind the Dairy Queen, hadn't said anything. Even though Facebook literally sends you notifications, and we'd just been texting about random TikToks 2 days before. I kept making excuses for her, thinking she was either busy with her new work in Denver, or arranging a surprise. But then I saw her Instagram story that night, and she was playing Topgolf with folks I'd never seen before, smiling and boasting about her fantastic new squad, complete with heart emoticons. That was when it struck me like a freight train. Between high school graduation and now, I'd become the friend she kept around out of habit rather than love, the safety net she texted when her new buddies weren't available. The pizza corporation that only wanted my money was more concerned about my existence than the person who used to vow we'd be sisters forever. And honestly, that automated text message felt more authentic than our previous 12 talks together. Have you ever hidden your feelings because men don't cry was pounded into you as a child? So here I am, 32 years old, sitting in my car outside the movie theater after watching Inside Out 2 with my fiancé, and I'm literally holding back tears because animated movies about feelings seem to hit differently after you've spent 3 decades bottling everything up. My father's voice is still playing on repeat in my head. Real men do not cry, son. Toughen up. What are you, a girl? This is classic early 2000s parenting, folks. Meanwhile, Olivia Jensen looks at me like, dude, it's okay to be emotional about a Pixar film. But I'm over here performing mental math, attempting to determine whether getting misty-eyed over cartoon characters makes me less of a guy, according to the toxic masculinity manual I never requested. Then my phone vibrates. My little nephew sent me a text. I too sobbed while watching the movie, Uncle Adam. My pals say boys don't weep, but you always remind me it's fine to have emotions. Are you proud of me? And then it hits me like a freight train full of irony and childhood anguish. This 9-year-old kid is braver than I have ever been. And I realize I've been so busy defending myself from my father's obsolete rulebook that I almost missed the most crucial lesson. The most powerful thing you can teach the next generation isn't how to hide their suffering, it's how to experience it, own it, and still present themselves as the person they want to be. So I wrote him back. I'm prouder than you'll ever realize, friend. When something important to them happens, real men cry. Have you ever watched everyone celebrate someone else's birthday while yours went entirely unnoticed? So there I was, sitting in the break room, watching my coworkers sing happy birthday to Natalie Brooks from accounting. You know, the one who pronounces Target as Targe and believes putting avocado on everything qualifies her as a wellness influencer. Meanwhile, I'm literally wearing a birthday badge my mother got for me on Amazon. Because let's be honest, I'm 30 and still hoping someone notices it's my special day as well. The cake came out, the Instagram stories started flying, and I'm just sitting there like a human participation award, appearing to be overjoyed about Natalie Brooks's surprise party, which she undoubtedly prepared herself. But here's the kicker. When I'm scrolling through my phone, feeling sorry for myself, I discover a text from my younger sister. I wish you a happy birthday, loser. Mom cooked your favorite cake, and we are all waiting for you to arrive home. Some of us do matter, you know. While I was busy expecting strangers to make my day memorable, my family had been bombarding my phone with birthday messages that I had missed because I was too preoccupied with feeling invisible. Sometimes the people who truly see you aren't the ones you're desperately trying to impress. They've been celebrating you all along, even while you're too preoccupied with your own pity party to notice. When did you understand you weren't the favorite child? At 14, I was sitting in the bleachers at my brother's Little League championship game, watching my parents lose their heads yelling for him, while I sat there with my math competition medal, which I had won 4 hours earlier but no one had asked to see. I kept waiting for them to glance over and give me that same triumphant smile, but their gaze never left the field. And when Noah Walsh struck out in the 8th inning, my mother burst into tears, as if he had just lost a full ride to college rather than a suburban Illinois rec league trophy. That's when it dawned on me. I could cure cancer, and they'd most likely ask if I remembered to attend Noah's JV basketball game. But here's what really bothers me. Years later, while browsing through old photo albums after Dad's death, I discovered that they had photographed me at the arithmetic competition. There are plenty of them. My mother had even created copies to present to my grandparents, with a note that read, "Our little genius makes us so proud." They just didn't know how to express it like they did with Noah's sports. They didn't realize I needed to see the same crazy delight in their eyes when I won with my wits rather than a bat. I spent 16 years believing I was invisible, while in reality I was simply loved in a language I didn't understand. What was the most difficult aspect of moving to a new nation for you? I discovered out I was pregnant on the same day that my Canadian work visa was accepted. I'm sitting in that doctor's office staring at two pink lines, with my Toronto job offer crinkling in my sweating palm. My lover, Daniel Hart, is still unaware of either situation. I stepped straight out and had my passport stamped because it was easier than making a phone call. 4 weeks later, I'm in Toronto, eating pho above a Vietnamese restaurant, researching Canadian healthcare, and texting Daniel at home. He texted wondering why I quit my job. I replied that I was now in Canada. He replied back and asked if I was insane. 7 months later, he arrives at my door. It turns out he had planned to propose the day I disappeared. He'd kept the ring in his pocket for half a year before flying across the Atlantic to ask me a question. We were having soup when he saw I wasn't drinking the beer he had brought. His face turned white. "How far along are we?" 8 months, I informed him. He placed a small velvet box next to the sriracha bottle. "I came to ask you to marry me," he said slowly. "But now I think I should ask if you want me to stay." I gazed at the ring, then at him, and finally at my tummy. "I don't know," I replied. "But would you like to find out together?" He relocated here 3 months before our kid was born. We never got married, but we kept that ring on our kitchen table for years, just next to the salt and pepper. Has another parent ever gotten upset with you for saying no to a child? Yeah. What she didn't realize was that the toy she asked me to hand over was the last thing my son would ever touch. We were in Target's toy section, and this woman's daughter kept groping for the Batman action figure in my cart. When I gently pulled it away, the mother rushed over, demanding that I give it to her child since she noticed it first, and "You're teaching children to be greedy." I tried to explain that it was a present, but she became louder and more hostile, calling me selfish in front of the other customers. And I just stood there, absorbing it, because I couldn't tell her that my 9-year-old son Leo had begged me for the exact Batman figurine 6 months ago, before his leukemia worsened. He put that Batman on his nightstand the morning he died, muttering about the adventures they'd have once he recovered. I promised him I'd get another one to remember him by. But this is what shattered me. When she finally pulled it from my hands and handed it to her daughter, saying, "There, that wasn't so hard." I didn't fight back. Because seeing that little girl's face light up reminded me so much of Leo that I couldn't take away her joy. I walked out of Target empty-handed and sobbing, realizing that saying no doesn't always mean being selfish. It's about guarding the parts of your heart that are too precious to share with strangers who will never comprehend why they're asking you to give up. Has your family ever bothered you about baby names? My entire extended family staged an intervention because I wanted to name my son Leo. Not because it's strange, but because it was my deceased brother's name. "You can't name a baby after someone who committed suicide," my aunt said during Thanksgiving dinner, as if she were delivering breaking news. "It's bad luck." My mom suggested Evan instead, as if changing 2 letters would trick the universe. "Leo was troubled," my father remarked. "You don't want that energy around a newborn." It appears that energy, like mental illness, is communicable through baby names. Nobody wanted to talk about this. Leo was more than simply my brother. He was my twin. We shared everything for 25 years until depression snatched him away, leaving me here, creating a nursery that feels like a shrine. They spent 4 months blasting me with safer options, traditional names that would not make people uncomfortable at PTA meetings. When my baby was born last Tuesday, the nurse asked what name to put on his wristband. I looked at my husband, who had remained mute during months of family pressure, and whispered, "Leo James, because sometimes you honor the dead by refusing to let the living erase them." Have you ever been banned from a drive-thru because you were too polite? Yeah, McDonald's on 5th Street, and they had it coming. When I was 17, Mom was dying of cancer, so I began going there every day, spending 20 minutes at the window, asking about Ella's children, Tommy's weekend plans, and Grace's cold. I memorized their routines, tales, and lifestyles. The management assumed I was scouting the establishment. The truth is, those drive-thru employees were the only ones who did not look at me with sympathy. They had no idea about my chemo appointments or how I would sit in that parking lot for hours because going home meant watching Mom fade away. For 7 months I treated the drive-thru as therapy and the minimum wage workers as family. Then Mom died on a Tuesday in November. I showed up the next day at the same time and in the same order. But when Ella inquired how I was doing, I burst into tears, sobbing and screaming right there while cars honked behind me. The manager came out and said, "Kid, you appear to be going through something, but you can't keep holding up the line like this. Find a separate space to process your emotions." I never went back. 22 years later, I still pass past that McDonald's and wonder if Ella or Tommy ever remember the strange kid who was too concerned with their life because he was too terrified to cope with his own. Have you ever met a celebrity and pretended you didn't know them? I'm working at a small bookstore in Seattle when Michael Fassbender walks in, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Baseball cap down, sunglasses indoors, and that whole please don't perceive me vibe. I'm 19 and absolutely broke because my father has recently been diagnosed with cancer, and I've been sending every paycheck home to help with medical expenditures. This was immediately after atonement, so my head is screaming inwardly, but I just seem normal and ask if he needs any assistance finding anything. He's quite courteous, buys this strange poetry book, and I call him without making a fuss about it. As he leaves, he pauses and says, "Thanks for being cool about this." I just shrug, as if I have no idea what he means. Later, when I'm closing shop, I uncover an envelope with my name on it that he must have left behind. Inside is a message that reads, "Your discretion means more than you know," and a check for $2,500. I stared at that check for almost 10 minutes, convinced it was a forgery or a mistake. Yet it was genuine. I contacted my father, crying, and informed him that I could finally afford to come home for his surgery. When Dad inquired how I acquired the money, I just explained that I picked up extra shifts. I never informed him about Michael Fassbender because really, who would believe that story? Dad's surgery went wonderfully, and he has been cancer-free for the past 16 years. I still have the poetry book Michael bought on my bookcase. Have you ever met a celebrity and pretended you didn't know them? Well, last Tuesday, I visited my father in a Costa Coffee in Manchester. He was working behind the counter. Yes, the man who walked out 18 years ago to find himself, is now asking if I want more foam. I ordered my regular flat white stone-faced while watching him fumble with the machine, which he had evidently only recently learned to use. His wedding band caught the light, obviously a different woman, and I was going to inquire if she knew about his prior family, or if we were simply his embarrassed pilot episode that was cancelled. He didn't recognize me until I said, "Thanks, Peter," instead of Dad, and his face turned white as if he'd seen a ghost, which, technically, he had. His small girl, perhaps 6 years old, was coloring at a corner table, completing the childhood I never had. He muttered, "Christ, is that really you?" I just smiled and said, "Wrong person, mate," and walked out with his exquisite coffee, made with his shaking hands. So yeah, revenge tastes like pricey lattes. Watching your substitute father realize his past just ordered a drink from his future, and to be honest, I've never tipped better in my life. Have you ever quit something that everyone warned you not to? When I was 14, my parents enrolled me in violin lessons, because to my musical prodigy hands. Mrs. Fontaine, my teacher, wore gravity scarves and spoke only in theatrical metaphors. For 6 years, I practiced scales while my friends did typical adolescent activities. I made it to our city's youth orchestra, which sounds impressive until you realize I was counting measures and praying I didn't destroy Mozart's legacy. My entire family's ambitions revolved upon my musical future. My parents spent thousands of dollars, my grandparents drove for hours to attend recitals, and my sister learned to play the flute so we could duet throughout life. So when I revealed over Sunday supper that I was quitting violin, you'd think I was suggesting we sell our house and join the circus. "But you're so talented," replied my mother. "Think of all the time invested." I thought my grandfather's money could save my mom's life, until I learned he shut down her clinic. Turns out, it was his biggest mistake. My mother was diagnosed, so I called every family with money for treatment support. My uncle with his Mercedes collection advised better planning. My aunt with the beach mansion denied responsibility. My grandfather, who owned half downtown commercial real estate, hung up when I cried. After years of boasting about their wealth, they didn't show up. After posting on our neighborhood Facebook site about requiring hospital trips, our elderly neighbor arrived with a casserole and a driving schedule within an hour. She barely knew us beyond greeting. 3 strangers deep cleaned our house the next morning to prevent Mom from getting illnesses. Our landlord lowered our rent without asking. My little brother's school lunch lady started preparing extra food for him to take home. Despite their poverty, they came every day while my wealthier relatives uploaded Italy vacation images. I held my mother when she cried when her hairdresser shaved her head for free at our house. The mechanic fixed our automobile for free so we could obtain therapy. The corner store owner sometimes forgot to charge us for groceries. These people kept us alive while my family ignored us. I learned about our city in the waiting room during Mom's second round of treatment. A mom told me her son died because the nearest hospital was 38 minutes away. The man I met lost his house to medical debt despite working 3 jobs. Everybody told how the system failed them while rich people like my family built another mall nobody needed. A young organizer urged me to help protest the shuttered health clinic as I was there every day. I attended city council meetings between mom's treatments and heard that my grandfather's company lobbied to close the clinic because the site was valuable. The granddad who wouldn't give us a penny robbed hundreds of people's healthcare to build luxury apartments. I began journaling every injustice and story. I had 180 pages of reasons to fight back by mom's last treatment. After 8 months of misery, mom went into remission, and our neighborhood staged a park picnic with food everyone had saved. My uncle drove by in his Tesla without slowing. That night, the organizer asked if I'd considered running for mayor since I saw everyone's hardships. I had 450 campaign volunteers in a month, and all of them had been abandoned by the system. 7 years had passed since my grandfather's golf pal hosted town hall. Bake sales and car washes funded our campaign, while developers wanted to build luxury condos where the food bank was. We registered 7,500 system-abandoned voters by knocking on every door in the district. We were ahead by single digits but growing weekly in polls. I had volunteers work 18-hour days because they felt we could alter things. Mom was our unofficial mascot, and survivors cried at rallies when they saw her. My granddad arrived at campaign headquarters with his lawyer while we led the polls by 14 points. He appeared worried after 2 years without talking to me. He threatened to evict every volunteer in his buildings if I didn't drop out. He owned half the apartment buildings in our district through unknown shell corporations. I have 46 of your volunteers on my tenant lists, he added, presenting me the papers with familiar names. Everyone gets 28 days notice tomorrow if they don't concede today. I informed him that was illegal, but his lawyer chuckled and said, "Good luck proving retaliation when they all missed rent during medical emergencies." My volunteers didn't know their slumlord was my grandfather, and finding out would ruin the campaign. He gave me till midnight to decide. I had 4 hours to win or keep 46 families home. On election night, our victory party's fire alarm went off from 18 points ahead. We evacuated quietly until we spotted smoke coming from the community center where we held voter registration efforts and campaign records. The building where Mom got free chemo meals burned. Her support group's meeting venue burned. The room where kids completed homework while parents worked 3 jobs burned. After fire trucks arrived, everything inside was gone. My grandfather texted, "Electrical fires are so common in old buildings." Another text followed immediately. "Your mother's oncologist works out of one of my medical buildings." A third made my hands shake. "So does the dialysis center where your neighbor gets treatment." A fourth, "And the pharmacy where your volunteers get their insulin." While Mom celebrated our win, I saw the flames burn the place that saved us. People cried, hugged, and took fire photos on their phones. As the news reported our landslide victory, my grandfather texted, "Concede tomorrow, or I start having more electrical problems at the children's clinic." I stood motionless, my phone screen lighting with grandfather's children's clinic threat, while smoke filled the night sky behind me. Mom was celebrating 20 feet away, and I had maybe 10 seconds to decide how to handle this without ruining her success. I shook my hands as I put the phone in my pocket and smiled as Mom ran over with tears of pleasure. While fire trucks wailed and sirens blared, she hugged me, and I thought about whose volunteers lived in grandfather's buildings. I quietly waved the young organizer over from across the evacuation zone while Mom talked to other supporters about our landslide triumph. We stopped near the yellow tape where firefighters were setting up their equipment, and I showed her my phone's texts, seeing her face blanch as she read each threat concerning the medical facilities and children's clinic. She grabbed my arm, and we quickly agreed to suspend any public concession while we protected volunteers from illegal eviction. I distracted Mom by pointing out supporters in the crowd and praising them while the organizer called for emergency legal help. In an hour, while the fire brigade poured water on the blazing ruins, the organizer introduced us to Marco Esposito, a tenants' rights attorney who had fought unjust evictions. He promised to meet us at 7:30 in the morning and ordered us to photograph everything before it disappeared. I screenshotted every grandfather communication and sent it to numerous email accounts, including one I made for this reason. I snapped images of the burning building from different angles, shaking with fury and dread, to document the destruction of the place that saved us throughout Mom's cancer treatment. Since our voter registration records were destroyed with the building, our campaign IT lead checked his laptop for backups. He identified partial voter lists in the cloud he uploaded last week but confirmed that most of our organizing paperwork, including volunteer contact sheets, were only in the ash-covered filing cabinets. As midnight arrived, the gathering thinned, and I got Mom home and into her bed, not telling her about the threats because stress could disrupt her remission. Keeping this from her weighed against my duty to safeguard her health, but I knew she'd fight if she realized what grandfather was doing. After she fell asleep, I texted our volunteer coordinators to secretly check whether team members rented from West Side Properties or Riverside Holdings without explaining why. I got 46 names in 1 hour, including Nina Calder, who led our biggest canvassing effort and knocked on 1,800 homes. As I stared at grandfather's list of families he could kill at my kitchen table, I purposefully missed midnight without surrendering. The organizer texted that she was making plans with volunteers for eviction letters and has lawyers ready to file emergency injunctions in the morning. After midnight, my phone went silent, which was worse than another threat because I didn't know what grandfather would do. After the fire, I spent the night searching through our campaign information on computers and phones to reconstruct what we lost. I received what the tech lead could recover, which was only 20% of what we'd developed over months of organizing. I dozed on the couch for a few hours at 2:45 a.m., before seeing Marco Esposito, knowing the fight would start when I woke up. Grandfather controlled their homes and clinics, even though the community elected me by 18 points. I'd won the election, but he'd showed me he could destroy everything I cared about if I didn't follow his rules. I answered my phone at 2:45 a.m., and the organizer started chatting before I could say hi. While I lay on the couch staring at the ceiling, she planned everything. She called 11 volunteers to set up emergency tenant meetings the next day. She contacted 3 housing-related media contacts. She spoke for 9 minutes on turning grandfather's threats into our biggest weapon while I took notes on an envelope. I had 4 pages of action items and shaking hands from non-fear by the time she hung up. I prepared coffee and texted the volunteer coordinators she mentioned to covertly promote the meetings without posting anything online. Marco Esposito arrived at my door at 7 with a briefcase and donuts. I signed forms where he pointed as he explained temporary restraining orders on my kitchen table. He claimed we had an excellent case but then outlined grandfather's lawyer's tactics. He sought confirmation that my grandfather owned Westside Properties and Riverside Holdings, not merely shell corporations. He took out more discovery and subpoena forms. While stressing that judges don't appreciate emergency orders without concrete evidence of immediate damage. He took images of my phone with grandfather's texts and made me write down all I knew about his campaign headquarters visit. Since landlords may always identify technical lease infractions to justify evictions, establishing retribution would be difficult. He had 38 pages of legal documentation to file by 9 but doubted our chances. Called Camille Duran from my car on my way to meet Marco at the courts after finding her number in my old campaign notes. She heard the first call and knew about the fire from the news. I informed her of probable development interests without naming grandfather. I heard her typing as she asked pointed questions regarding timing and paperwork. She requested copies of threats, ownership documents for volunteer housing, and a fire timeline. She said she had people who could assist her connect housing corruption dots after 3 years of investigation. She wouldn't promise anything without proof, but she'd meet once I had more. I met Clara Weiss from the fire department at lunchtime and saw yellow tape around the burning community center. She explained where they found burn patterns and inquired when I noticed the smoke and who was at the victory celebration. She took notes in a little notepad while I explained the election results before the fire. She said the probe was suspicious based on preliminary results but couldn't reveal more. She requested my mobile number and stated she could have follow-up questions that couldn't be answered officially. She glanced over the building for a while before warning me to be careful and consider staying somewhere for a few nights. While I was outside the burning building, Tomas Richter called to meet immediately. He uncovered patterns I needed in clinic closure records after staying up all night. He presented maps and timings of grandfather's enterprise's systematic targeting of properties near transit lines and hospitals at a diner. The clinic wasn't just important land, it was part of a neighborhood-wide expulsion scheme. He gave me correspondence from public records requests showing the closure was planned 3 years in advance. He promised to share everything with my legal team and called other advocates fighting similar cases. We spent 4 hours reviewing documents while he described how they fit into systematic displacement. A statement regarding the fire was drafted at 5 by the campaign team to avoid grandfather's lawyer's ammo. We meticulously removed any hint of arson or threat link in 11 drafts. The final version expressed grief about losing a community landmark and complimented the fire brigade for their rapid reaction. We shared it on social media and with local news outlets, seeing response numbers rise. People started talking about the community center and volunteering to rebuild without knowing someone had set it on fire. The organizer took media calls while maintaining the agreed message of focusing on the future rather than the cause. A courier delivered an urgent mail from grandfather's legal company to my flat at 6:30 that evening. The cease and desist letter said I would defame his firm. It threatened legal action if I publicly linked him to the fire or suggested criminality. Marco Esposito chuckled when I emailed him images, saying they'd shown their fright. He added it to our expanding file and began composing a legal response telling them to pound sand. My phone called at 6:15 the next morning, and Nina broke down as she informed me about the eviction notice on her door. 27 days to leave for lease issues they claimed occurred months ago but were only handled today. From knocking on 1,800 doors for our campaign, she would become homeless. I jotted down every detail of the notice and pledged to fight it while she apologized like it was her fault. In an hour, 13 more volunteers contacted with the identical narrative and 27-day deadline. Camille evaluated my findings at a downtown coffee shop. The ownership documentation Marco found and grandfather's threatening texts were photographed by her. She said her editor required 2 independent sources before publishing anything linking him to the fire. She has researchers investigating shell firms, but told me they take time. She asked about other volunteers who could go on the record and developed a database of eviction victims. She pledged to safeguard sources but suggested sharing some experiences would strengthen the article. Clara texted me that afternoon stating they'd detected accelerant at many locations in the building but required more testing before declaring it official. She advised me to spread out my everyday excursions and avoid lonely locations. She couldn't tell more via text but suggested we meet soon to discuss their findings. 4 days later, Tomas called me as I was sifting through our campaign files and said he knew a state attorney general's office employee who could help with housing. Thomas had given Isabel Moreau, who worked in their housing discrimination unit, the standard eviction warnings. She had boxes of case files everywhere in her 4th-floor office when I drove to the state building that afternoon, heard everything about the 46 volunteers facing eviction, and took notes on a yellow legal pad while asking precise questions about dates and names. She said state participation in local housing disputes required proof of a pattern across numerous counties and advised I check for similar issues in other locations where grandfather had property. She gave me her direct contact and advised to call if we found additional proof, but warned me these cases took months or years to construct. Our IT lead panicked on the way back to campaign headquarters after discovering that half our donor records were destroyed in the fire, making it impossible to trace our campaign funds. He tried to recreate on his computer using bank records and emails, but tons of little cash gifts from bake sales and car washes had no paper trace. Since we couldn't verify our funding was lawful, the incumbents' people would use this against us if they challenged the election results. I urged him to keep working and document anything he could retrieve while I decided what to do. While helping him sort bank records that night, we discovered 11 failed login attempts from unfamiliar IP addresses in our campaign email account. Someone had been trying to access our accounts for 4 days with different passwords. We updated all our passwords and enabled 2-factor authentication, wondering what else grandfather was trying to access. The tech lead updated our security software and checked all accounts for unusual activities. Mom had a cancer center follow-up 3 days later and couldn't move it without compromising her health. I felt sick walking through grandfather's medical building's cancer center doors, since he controlled everything within. I sat in the waiting room with her, staring at the other patients who didn't realize their landlord owned the facility. The nurse called Mom back for blood work and scans while I watched people pass through the automatic doors in the lobby. All doctors here paid rent to grandfather's company and risked losing office space if they crossed him. I couldn't cheer when Mom walked out an hour later with good blood counts because we were in his building. I kept looking over my shoulder for his security guards or lawyers as we strolled to the parking garage in silence. 13 volunteers facing eviction attended Nina's library meeting that afternoon, ready to fight. They formed an emergency tenants council to share information and assist each other throughout eviction. Nina promptly formed legal research, media outreach, and mutual help committees. Watching these individuals battle for their houses gave me more strength that week than anything else. Daily check-ins and a phone tree ensured no one faced this alone. The next morning, a blocked number called my personal phone, and grandfather's voice faked concern about the community center fire. He heard about the incident and asked if our family could discuss it since we'd gone through so much. He kept talking about how unsafe old buildings are and how decent people might get hurt, so I recorded him on my phone. He recommended we meet for coffee to address the subject like family instead of foes and hinted at greater problems if we didn't agree immediately. I held my cool and said I was too busy with transition plans to meet but would consider his offer. He promised to call again and advised me to keep together in tough times before hanging up. 9 minutes later, the incumbent mayor's chief of staff called our main campaign line to say they were considering challenging the election results owing to the damaged records. He said the lack of paperwork raised issues about proper processes and their responsibilities to safeguard election integrity. The organizer quickly called volunteers to acquire sworn affidavits from every voter we'd registered while memories were fresh. We have 4 days to gather 7,200 statements for certification. Everyone stopped to help find voters and acquire their signatures on legal documents. Lucas Navarro, who worked at grandfather's company, emailed me about the health clinic closure that evening. He recommended a coffee shop across town where no one from the company would notice us because he was afraid to meet near the workplace. I invited Marco to a meeting the next morning for safety, and to hear Lucas's remarks. Lucas arrived 15 minutes early and sat in the back corner booth, nervously gazing about. He found a folder of printed emails from 3 years ago indicating grandfather's company contemplating clinic property development before it closed. These emails discussed ways to bankrupt the clinic so they could buy the land cheaply. Lucas's hands shook as he claimed he kept these records because he knew it was wrong but was too terrified to act until now. He agreed to be a source if his name was kept private. Only 9 of our volunteers were safeguarded from eviction after the court judgment on interim restraining orders 3 days later. The judge stated the others needed more proof of retaliation. Though Nina was safe, 34 families suffered homelessness in 4 weeks. Marco began appeals while the tenants' council protested outside the courts. That afternoon, the fire department reported an unclear cause pending further inquiry. The report said they were continuing testing and questioning witnesses but couldn't decide. Clara texted me 9 minutes after the news was public, stating they were constructing a strong case. But these things required time, and I had to be patient while they gathered court-worthy evidence. The state attorney general's Isabel Moreau contacted the next morning to organize a 4-day intake interview. She immediately stated that the AG required proof of patterns affecting numerous counties, not just our city. I called activists in surrounding towns the rest of the day and found 6 more clinics that inexplicably closed before luxury constructions. Isabel took notes throughout our 2.5-hour conversation but stressed that documentation was key. She provided me a list of data to obtain and advised I check for comparable issues in other states. Meanwhile, the community began fundraising to reconstruct the destroyed center. In 52 hours, car washes, bake sales, and GoFundMe sites raised $28,000. Since the fire department had identified it as a crime scene, we couldn't touch a brick. Kids have nowhere to conduct homework after school, while the money sat in a bank account. Seniors who got free lunches there went hungry. Support groups in that facility crowded into a church basement. 4 nights after the fire, an unmarked car parked across from my apartment building. Someone watched it for 3.5 hours. 2 officers arrived 25 minutes after I contacted the police. My report was checked, but the driver had a right to park on a public street. The police claimed they couldn't help until the person threatened me or breached the law. I noticed the automobile parked a block away the next morning after the police left. Our tech lead spent days recovering voter data from backups and personal laptops. He assembled 62% of our registration lists from volunteer emails and spreadsheets. Unfortunately, much of our donation records and organizing maps were lost forever. We'd have to reconstruct our infrastructure while running the city. Volunteers debated revealing grandfather owned their apartment buildings. Half wanted complete transparency to show voters our opponents. The other half feared I would use public office for a family conflict. Nina suggested focusing on eviction threats without name grandfather. Another suggestion was to wait for fire investigation evidence. People yelled about tactics while their houses were at risk. Marco told us to stay strategic and deny grandfather's lawyers ammunition. We issued a careful statement about development dangers after 2 days of debate. We didn't identify anyone but said influential people were trying to thwart our reforms. The statement had hundreds of social media shares immediately. Many commented on being evicted by developers. Local news covered it, and city development corruption became a hot topic. Camille wrote her first piece linking the clinic closure to a developer network after days of research. She didn't name grandfather, but enough details were given to make connections. The report illustrated how the same corporations appeared when public services closed. She had maps, timetables, and former city employee quotes confirming the pattern. It went viral locally with thousands of shares in the first few hours. Silent city officials had to answer reporters' questions about the ties. That afternoon, Lucas sent me grandfather's company's internal communications from 3 years before the clinic closed. When available, the clinic land would be ideal for luxury condos, according to emails. They were told to start planning because the clinic would close in 16 months. Lucas handed up the printed documents at our meeting site, shivering. He kept looking about for followers. He agreed to be a protected source but asked me not to reveal the document leaker. Camille, Isabel and Marco received copies shortly after I swore to protect him. The clinic shutdown wasn't due to budget issues, and these emails proved it. 3 days later, a process server brought a large envelope to campaign headquarters. Slap complaint filed by grandfather's lawyers claimed my public words damaged his company reputation. They demanded $3 million and an immediate apology for anything I stated. Marco reviewed the filing and scoffed at several assertions. He said these lawsuits were meant to sap our finances with legal bills, even if we'd win. Instead of winning in court, they wanted to drain us financially and emotionally. Despite working at lower rates, he projected we'd spend $60,000 protecting against it. I caught Mom crying in the kitchen with her phone that night. She knew grandfather was using her cancer treatment against me. She apologized repeatedly for something she didn't do. She cried while I held her about why I couldn't fight back. She suggested changing oncologists so grandfather couldn't endanger her care. I told her no, because her health always came first. I promised to get through everything as we sat on the kitchen floor for an hour as she wailed. Thomas contacted me before coffee the next morning, with documents on his desk. After all night searching city records, he found something that made him shake. The community center had 16 code infractions in 3 years, but all were addressed without repairs. The fire department reported poor wiring twice, and the building inspector noted water damage rendering the structure dangerous. The previous government signed off on bogus repairs that never transpired, therefore nothing got fixed. Tomas showed me the signatures on every approval form, and they all belonged to the same city official who received developer campaign payments. The pattern was so obvious even without legal expertise. 2 hours later, I sat across from the incumbent's chief of staff in his old leather and costly cologne-smelling office. He sat back and smiled as I told him about the threats and flames. He said it was political growing pains, and I'd understand after more experience. He told me this was how life worked and advised me to move forward rather than linger on the past. His dismissive tone made my hands tighten under the desk, but I kept my cool while he stated they knew about the corruption. For their eviction press conference that afternoon, the Renters' Council set up microphones outside City Hall. Nina stood at the podium shivering with eviction papers as 31 residents lined up behind her. She said she worked 3 jobs to pay rent but got a notice for helping my campaign. Her voice trembled when she said her kids asked whether they had to switch schools again. Other renters told their stories as reporters took notes and cameras rolled. An elderly guy submitted medical records showing he never skipped rent until the eviction notification. Single mother showed images of mold in her flat that the landlord never fixed despite hundreds of requests. People strolling past stopped to listen, and some started crying when they heard familiar struggles. The next day, District Attorney Adrian Keller met me in a small conference room with a recorder and thick notebook. He read each grandfather's SMS word for word and asked me when it arrived. He compared my screenshots to phone records his office had collected. He probed who saw the texts and whether I told anyone about the threats before the fire. Even though he cautioned me that cases proceeded slowly, his systematic approach gave me optimism that someone was finally taking this seriously. He noted down every name I mentioned and requested witness contact information to check the timing. 4 days later, grandfather's lawyer brought an expensive paper settlement offer to campaign headquarters. After sliding it across the table, Marco began reading with his eyebrows rising with each page. If I approved 7 development projects after taking office, all evictions would halt immediately. The food bank was converted into retail, while the original library was demolished for condos. Marco laughed out loud when grandfather's company secured exclusive city construction contracts. With a straight face, the lawyer pretended this was a business pitch, not corruption. Marco shoved the papers away and told him we needed time to think about such a fantastic offer while trying not to smile. The incumbent called an emergency city council session that week to pass a new old building condemnation ordinance. The rule would allow the city to declare any structure over 38 years old hazardous without inspection. With 28 days' notice, developers might buy condemned houses at below market prices. We recognized he was trying to cement grandfather's agenda before leaving government in 3 weeks. The incumbent's allies won despite our council members' attempts to delay the vote. They passed it 9-5 while citizens shouted from the gallery about their homes being robbed. I felt ill seeing them legalize half our district's theft from the back row. Mom entered my room 2 mornings later with her phone in tears. Her full medical history was leaked to a gossip blog, which included her cancer treatment. The blog included her treatment regimen and medical file images of her weight reduction. They leaked our bank statements from when we couldn't afford her prescriptions and screenshots of my urgent texts to family. Mom sat on my bed smiling and said it didn't matter what others thought. but her hands shook. Even though she did nothing wrong, she kept apologizing for burdening the campaign. The blog post received thousands of shares in hours and called us liars and swindlers. Most volunteers were protected at the restraining order hearing the next week. 6 families, including a sick elderly couple, faced eviction in 8 days. We hurried to locate them lodgings as Marco filed emergency appeals that will likely be denied. Churches and allies with additional rooms provided temporary shelter, but splitting up these families felt like letting grandfather win. Camille's second article that afternoon examined the eviction shell firms. She showed how Westside Properties and Riverside Holdings were related to dozens of entities through layers of paperwork. Over 11 years, her inquiry documented forced clinic, community center, and small company closures around the city. She didn't name grandfather, but enough details were given to make connections. The story included papers indicating how property values unexpectedly rose after closures. She interviewed evicted tenants whose experiences mirrored ours. Lucas panicked when his supervisor asked why he was missing so many meetings. The supervisor noticed Lucas's car in unexpected places and pondered about home. This was a warning that they suspected something, but Lucas couldn't quit without losing his health insurance. Marco immediately began whistleblower protection paperwork as we documented Lucas's work interactions. We urged him to behave normally and keep copies of questionable emails on a burner phone. After signing whistleblower documents, he vomited in our office restroom from fright. Eric Holm from the arson task force called me at 6:15 the next morning to say the lab results were in, and we needed to meet immediately. He showed me the report showing accelerant residues on the community center's first level when I drove to the police station. He said arson cases often take months or years to pursue, but given the election schedule, this was a priority. While I sent grandfather's menacing SMS again, his team pulled surveillance footage from every shop within 3 blocks. The election board held an emergency meeting that afternoon to schedule next week's certification hearing. The incumbents' lawyers challenged 5 precincts where our voter registration activities had the most impact. They said we couldn't show those votes were authentic without the destroyed documents. Marco started collecting affidavits from every voter registration volunteer, while our tech lead collected bank records showing hundreds of tiny donations from certain communities. We prepared evidence binders till 2:45 a.m. to defend our victory. The next day, my elderly neighbor brought her famous dish and ate with me at the kitchen table. Our town survived before that building and will endure whatever. Grandfather destroyed, she said. Her straightforward remarks reminded me why we were fighting. Mom saw me going over certification hearing records that night and asked if she might speak on what this election meant to her. I worried about her safety with grandfather increasing, but her voice might be what the election board needs. We prepared her statement all night as she practiced keeping calm and focused. All seats were filled at the county courthouse certification hearing with supporters and reporters. Mom spoke for 4 minutes about medicine versus rent before our neighbors intervened. My hairdresser shaved her head for free, and our mechanic fixed our car for free. The room went hushed as she explained how strangers become family while our relatives left us. She concluded, "This election was about neighbors helping neighbors and giving everyone the chance our community gave her." The election board members wiped their eyes as she sat down. Our success was confirmed by the board, 5-1 after 6.5 hours of testimony and analyzing our evidence binders. Voter affidavits and donor records provided overwhelming proof. The incumbent stood up and vowed to monitor for anomalies but couldn't stop certification. Despite the lost documents and grandfather's attempts to steal it, we triumphed. Grandfather's lawyers added $3 million in defamation damages to their slap action 3 days later. They claimed my public pronouncements regarding dangers and development ambitions damaged his business reputation and finances. Marco invited Victoria Leone, a strategic lawsuit attorney who silenced detractors, to join our team pro gratis. She promptly prepared our anti-slap motion after winning scores of these instances. District Attorney Adrian Keller subpoenaed grandfather's phone records to confirm the threatening texts came from his devices. He said the legal wheels turned slowly, but this was official recognition of criminal behavior. His detectives interviewed witnesses and created a fire and threat chronology. Nina's Tenants Council now included inhabitants from 14 of grandfather's buildings. Their initial building-wide agreement covered residents who engaged in our campaign against retaliation. We plan to use the agreement in all grandfather's city buildings. Tenants complained about years of neglected upkeep and rent increases that drove families out. When mobilizing for collective bargaining, they documented everything. Camille's investigation culminated in a detailed exposé that named grandfather as the mastermind behind decades of healthcare and housing exploitation. Her report featured Lucas's neighborhood clinics and community services. She identified shell corporations, political links, and forcing closures to steal land. The story demonstrated how he stole health treatment from people while developing luxurious residences on the ruins. She blamed one man's avarice for 35 years of agony and provided evidence from families who lost loved ones when the nearest hospital became too far away. Social internet went wild with thousands of accounts of grandfather's exploitation. Former tenants reported improper evictions and unsafe living conditions. Healthcare staff said his lobbying wrecked their clinics. National media calling for interviews increased pressure. Grandfather's lawyers sent cease and desist letters to everyone, but the truth was spreading faster than they could contain. Next morning, I had 29 missed calls and a constant stream of volunteers texting me about grandfather on the news. He was seated across from the anchor in his nice suit, looking unhappy and anxious, when I switched on the TV. Family values and how his grandchild was leveraging personal issues for political gain were discussed. He said the fire was an accident I exploited, and that he had offered to help our family many times but we declined. When he revealed Mom's cancer and wanting to help us, his voice cracked properly. The anchor nodded sympathetically as grandfather blamed ungrateful family. After throwing my sneaker at the TV, it bounced harmlessly as he lied about reconnecting. Marco called me immediately after the segment ended to ask me not to comment. He added people were publishing Camille's writings alongside grandfather's assertions online, contradicting the account. 1,000 comments on the news station's Facebook page called out the lies inside an hour. People told anecdotes of grandfather's buildings and closed clinics. Too many people understood the truth. Thus damage control failed. 4 days later, Eric Holm and 2 other arson task force investigators arrived at my residence. They interviewed all Victory Party attendees in the City Hall conference room. Eric said they couldn't name suspects but were making progress on the case. He requested copies of all threatening texts and detailed chronology questions. His staff reviewed all our evidence. Further investigation of the fire scene revealed accelerant evidence that ruled out unintentional explanations. The investigation intensified, with subpoenas for surrounding building surveillance footage. Eric claimed they were taking this seriously, but said it would take months to create a good case. Leaked records proving grandfather's enterprises targeted underprivileged. Victoria Leone and I spent hours writing an ethics policy to keep things clean. She said I'd have to stay out of city decisions regarding grandfather's homes or companies. She felt bad leaving when his constructions damaged people, but she maintained it was the only way to stay legitimate. We devised steps for the deputy mayor to manage those challenges. I could not be accused of using my office for revenge because the policy encompassed zoning and code enforcement. Victoria needed 3 versions to ensure we covered all potential conflicts of interest. The policy went public the day Adrian Keller received our court-approved protective order. 45 households might stay in their houses since the injunction prohibited mass evictions during the criminal probe. Adrian brilliantly linked the threatening evictions to the election and witness tampering. The judge decided that tenants shouldn't lose their homes during landlord investigations. Grandfather's lawyers fought hard, but the evidence was overwhelming. Depending on the findings, the protective order could last 8 months or more. After 3 weeks, the court dismissed most of grandfather's slander allegations against us. Political speech was protected, and grandfather hadn't shown malice in our words, the judge wrote. Victoria called it a major triumph, despite months-long procedural hurdles. She indicated that grandfather will pay our legal bills since he lost the major claims. His lawyers would utilize the remaining difficulties as paperwork to salvage face. Even though the conflict was ongoing, we won the legal battle. Lucas was suspended from grandfather's company that week for performance difficulties. He worked there for 9 years with flawless reviews before becoming our investigation source. His attitude and commitment to the company were vaguely noted in the suspension letter. Just hours after the news spread, our community rallied behind him. People started delivering groceries to his flat, and a rent fund was formed. 3 local firms soon offered him positions, including a better position with a housing justice charity. After joining the organization, Lucas became more determined to expose grandfather's corruption. His suspension was a complete failure and allowed him to talk about what he saw. Grandfather met me in the City Hall parking lot after a transition meeting a month before my swearing in. He looked older than ever in his fancy coat alongside my car. He ordered me to stop the circus and consider the family name. He spoke calmly but shook his hands about our family's reputation being ruined. He was standing in his $1,000 shoes, and I remembered Mom crying during chemo. I told him the family ended when he hung up on me when I cried for help. I passed him on my way to my car without glancing back while he stood alone in the empty parking lot. We held the swearing in at Jefferson Elementary instead of City Hall to make it accessible. Hundreds of supporters, including all Mom's cancer caregivers, crowded the gymnasium. Because she persisted on bringing food, our elderly neighbor sat in the front row with her casserole dish. The free car fixing mechanics and Mom's hairdresser stood together. The lunch lady took my younger brother's class to the event. Even the corner business owner closed for an hour to join us. Simple service replaced celebration and extravagant remarks in the wedding. The Emergency Housing Stabilization Task Force executive order was my first move as mayor after taking the oath. Nina Calder and other residents threatened with eviction led it during the campaign. The task force could investigate retaliation and suggest immediate renter protections. We gave them a budget and staff to make improvements, not just write reports. They began promptly analyzing all evictions from the past year for retaliation. Mom had her latest cancer center scans 2 days later, trying not to think about grandfather owning the facility. The results showed she was in perfect remission with no cancer symptoms. She shed delighted tears in the workplace as I held her hand and praised every authority. That afternoon, she decided to deliberately push for community healthcare access. She joined Thomas's group but pledged to be healthy and not overdo it. She first met survivors by listening to their treatment battle experiences. 4 days after that discussion, a Regional Health Foundation employee called my office to ask about the burning community center. She said they had a new grant program for towns with healthcare access concerns and would match our local fundraising. However, the community, not the city or corporate developers, had to oversee rebuilding. I convened Nina and other center volunteers for an emergency meeting. We spent 5 hours on butcher paper planning every program we wanted to bring back and developing new ones based on demand. The foundation representative attended our next meeting and saw 55 people present new center concepts. A single mom noted how the former center's daycare let her keep her employment while she took notes. Diabetic teen showed her insulin storage issues at school the center helped with. The foundation provided $2.5 million in matching money immediately if we established a decision-making community board. Sitting in my new workplace, I stare at my desk full of documents. Through shell corporations, grandfather owns half downtown buildings. The arson investigation continues, but Eric believes these cases take years to pursue. The 45 families are protected, but court orders won't last forever. Interviewing architects who understand community-driven design begins tomorrow. However, those families sleep without eviction notices tonight. That's something. When I came home from prison, my husband unfolded a death certificate with my name, and my son whispered, "But Daddy said you died 10 months ago." Staring at the kid whose silly smile I could never misinterpret, I held my release papers near the door. "Leo baby, it's me. It's Mommy. I'm home." Leo turned pale like a ghost. "But Daddy said you died in prison." "What? That's crazy. I'm right here." He retreated into the house crying. No. Mommy's dead. We went to her funeral. I put flowers on the wooden box she was in." "What box? What funeral?" I advanced, but Leo ran deeper into the house. "Daddy." When my husband Marcus spotted me in the hallway, his knees buckled. "Who are you?" Protectively he tucked Leo behind him. "Marcus, what are you talking about? It's me, Elena. I just got released from prison." I presented my release papers but he didn't move. "Elena died 10 months ago," he sobbed. "Suicide in her cell." The warden called me himself and delivered the goodbye letter. I identified the body. We buried her. Weak legs. "That's impossible. I wrote you letters every week. I called when I could. We talked about Leo's birthday a month ago." Marcus shook his head slowly. "I haven't gotten a letter or call in 10 months. Not since," he said. "Since my wife died. I don't know who you are or what kind of sick game this is, but you need to leave." "Game? Marcus. I'm your wife. We've been married for 13 years. He took a folder from the kitchen drawer. His hands were solid now, like he'd decided. My death certificate, prison letterhead stating I'd committed suicide, and funeral program with my photo were inside. "This is my wife's death certificate," he whispered. "Signed by the prison doctor." I regarded the documents. Official seals, signatures, everything looked legitimate. "This is fake. It has to be. Someone's lying to you." Looked around his father. "You smell like Mommy," he said. "Like her shampoo." Marcus persisted. He gently retracted Leo. "Buddy, I know you miss Mommy, but this isn't her. Sometimes bad people pretend to be someone we love." His protecting, mournful tone drove me insane. A blonde, possibly 30-year-old woman stepped from the hallway with her hand on a pregnant belly. She appeared 8 months pregnant. "Marcus, is everything okay?" She approached and touched his arm. "This woman says she's Elena," Marcus whispered. The blonde's eyes widened in amazement and sympathy. "Oh, honey." She extended her hand. "I'm so sorry, but after Marcus lost his wife, we met in a support group. I lost my husband too. I know how horrible grief can be." She faced Marcus. "Should I call the police? You married someone else?" I gasped when I saw her ring. "It's been 10 months, and you're already having a baby with someone else." I grieved. I moved forward for Leo. "Sophia has been wonderful with him." Hand squeezed by Sophia. "Leo, sweetie, why don't you go to your room while we handle this?" Leo glanced at me again. I was gaining his trust. "But she has mommy's voice too." I gave him our pancake time smile. She smiled. Sophia bent to him. "I know, sweetie." Leo's eyes sparkled. He asked, "Can I go hug her?" "No, honey. Your mommy is in heaven, remember? We visited her special place last week." My protests were ignored as she ordered Leo upstairs and pulled out her phone. "I'm sorry, but I need to protect my family." She called 911 while my husband stood by. "Yes, there's a woman at our house claiming to be my husband's deceased wife. She seems mentally ill." My urgent plea was, "Wait. Ask me anything. Anything about us that only I would know," I implored Marcus. "Our first date was at that terrible Chinese place. You got food poisoning. Leo was born during a snowstorm." Marcus's expression changed. Sophia interrupted. "Anyone could find that out. Social media, talking to friends." "Ma'am, I understand grief makes people do things, but this is cruel." "The C-section scar on my stomach," I said. "That looks like a sword." Marcus's face blanched. "How do you know that?" I revealed my sword-shaped C-section scar by lifting my shirt. Marcus stumbled backward. "Oh my God, how is this possible?" Sophia gripped his arm. "Marcus, scars can be faked. Don't let her manipulate you." Marcus was clearly conflicted. Within minutes, police arrived. Marcus presented him the death certificate and the police examined my release papers. "These release papers look legitimate." The officer replied. "But so does this death certificate. Let me make some calls." With phone in ear, he walked aside. He returned 20 minutes later. "The prison confirms Elena Moreau died 10 months ago, suicide. Body was released to the family." He pitied me. "Ma'am, I don't know who you are, but you need to leave. If you come back, you'll be arrested." Through the upstairs window I heard Leo wailing as they carried me away. "But she knew about the scar. Mommy always said it's because I was her warrior." Sophia's voice calmed him. "Sometimes people do research. Your daddy talks about your mommy online. Sometimes people can learn things." But how she said it chilled me. I was going to investigate something suspicious. After 3 blocks, I pulled into an empty parking lot behind a shuttered grocery shop. It was hard to turn off the engine with shaking hands. In my lap was the crumpled release paper the officer had seized to check. I kept hearing him say the prison certified my death 10 months ago. My phone has 4% battery and no charger. I sat back and stared at the car's ceiling, trying to understand what happened. I couldn't stop thinking about Marcus's face when he saw me, the way he stared at me like a stranger. Sophia touching his arm protectively, like she owned him, Leo screaming through the window about the scar. Gray light came through the windshield when I opened my eyes, so I must have drifted off. My mouth tasted bad and my neck hurt from the odd angle. I checked my phone, 3% battery, 7:15 a.m. The county records office opened at 8. I drove downtown with my release papers in one hand. The records clerk was sleepy and wore glasses on a chain. I moved my papers across the counter. After looking at them, she typed on her computer. Her finger froze. She stared at the TV, then me, then back. She silently pressed a button on her phone. A supervisor in a tie emerged from a rear office based on his badge. He raised his eyebrows at my computer-typed materials. "Ma'am, our system shows you deceased as of 10 months ago," he whispered. "Death certificate filed by the Department of Corrections." My stomach sank. "That's impossible. I just got out yesterday. I'm right here." Clicked his mouse several times. "The record shows Elena Moreau died by suicide in custody. There's a death certificate." Paused. "Would you like a copy?" I nodded because I couldn't speak. He went into the back and emerged with a printed certificate with my name, birth date, death date 10 months ago, prison doctor's signature and a real-looking state seal. I shakily walked to my car and compared the two documents in the driver's seat. Letterhead, autographs and stamps adorned the release sheets. Official letterhead, signatures and stamps were on the death certificate. Both appeared real. They possessed state seals. Someone with access to official systems and papers took great pains to manufacture a death certificate and upload it to government databases while keeping me alive in prison. I had to determine who and why, but where to begin? The jail counselor mentioned a downtown re-entry resource center for transitioning prisoners. I had only $45 in release funds and nowhere to stay. Before the battery died, I typed the address into my phone and drove there. Old brick structure with faded sign housed the re-entry facility. When I entered, the front desk clerk looked up. As I explained my circumstances, her look went from polite inquiry to shock to alarm. She took her phone mid-sentence and dialed. "I need to connect you with legal aid right now," stated. "This is way beyond normal re-entry stuff. You need a lawyer who understands criminal justice and civil identity problems." She directed me to a corner PC while calling. I entered my old email account with my remembered password. Everything appeared odd when the account opened. I reviewed my login history and found a foreign IP address 10 months ago. My password changed that day. I was shut out when the death certificate arrived. Someone had hijacked my email to prevent me from communicating. Back at the front desk, I requested the phone. I called the prison's records department from memory after the woman gave it to me. A board clerk replied. I requested my phone and outgoing mail logs. She held me. 20 minutes of terrible elevator music later, she returned. "Those records require a formal written request. Processing takes 5 to 7 weeks." The call ended with me feeling defeated. I didn't have time, paperwork, or waiting. Re-entry worker grinned at me and said, "Legal aid is calling you back. They're scheduling an intake appointment." 5 minutes later, her phone rang. She gave it to me, and I spoke to someone who scheduled me with Nadia Keller, an attorney, 4 days later. 4 days without sleep felt like eternity, and my son thought I was dead. Re-entry worker must have seen my face because she called again and obtained me a nighttime emergency shelter bed. I thanked her and left with a slip of paper with the address. Back in my car, I kept thinking about Leo's face when he spotted me. How his eyes brightened up briefly before dread took over. He recognized me. He remembered my voice, grin, and smell. He knew I was his mom before Sophia convinced him differently. I found a notebook in my glove compartment and wrote down every detail of our life together, including how I made dinosaur-shaped pancakes, the song I sang when he couldn't sleep, the game we played where we pretended his toy cars could talk, the time he broke his arm falling off the swing, and I held him in the emergency room, his favorite stuffed elephant, Mr. Trunk, and the scar on his knee from learning to ride his bike. Things only his real mother knew. I may need these to prove myself. The re-entry worker gave me the shelter address to drive to. The structure was run down, with peeling paint and a flickering entrance light. I received a locker key and a thin blanket from a front desk employee who checked my name against a list. I spotted an empty cot along the back wall in the sleeping room with rows of cots. I sat on the cot with my release form on my lap after putting my car keys and notebook in the locker. My property inventory document stated my toothbrush, 3 books, a 6-year-old photo of Leo, 2 pairs of socks, underwear, and the prison-issued clothes I wore out in my cell when I was released. However, I remembered writing at least 5 letters to Marcus in the weeks before my assumed death 10 months ago, about Leo's birthday, counting down the days till freedom, and missing them both. The outgoing mail log on my property sheet did not indicate the mailings. After writing a letter to my sister 10 months ago, the log halted, and my ability to contact with the outside world vanished overnight. Someone's alarm 3 cots over woke me up early. I felt gritty from sleeping in my clothes, and my back suffered from the thin mattress. I took my belongings from the locker and left before breakfast. The death certificate Marcus showed me mentioned the cemetery and plot number. I entered the address into my phone and drove across town. Open cemetery gates. I walked the meandering route past rows of headstones to the section number. After parking and walking across soggy grass, I studied names and dates on markers until I saw my name, Elena Moreau, my birth date, and a 10-month-old death date. Fresh flowers were in a metal vase on the headstone. Marcus and Leo have likely visited my tomb recently. Looking at my headstone, I felt like I was seeing myself from outside. This was real. Someone bought it. Who inscribed my name in stone? My supposed body was buried here. Everything felt awful and made my skin crawl. I snapped images of the gravestone, flowers, plot number marker, and funeral home name inscribed at the bottom with my phone. I returned to my car and looked up the 3-block funeral home address. I drove to their small lot and parked. The brick building with white columns tried to be sophisticated but looked antiquated. Inside smelt like flowers and carpet cleaning. I entered to find a dark-suited man looking up from a desk. I requested to speak to Elena Moreau's arrangers from 10 months ago. He seemed confused and inquired whether I was related. Calling as Elena Moreau, I requested the file. He paled and rose up, claiming he needed the director. Franz Meyer, an older man, emerged a few minutes later. I could tell he thought I was a scammer or nuts when he inquired what was up. He saw the jail ID bracelet they neglected to tear off when I left when I showed him my release papers and wrist. He went from defensive to astonished. I was told to wait and he went into a back office. He returned with a big folder. Sitting at a table in a small conference room, he opened it carefully. Dr. Henrik Olsen from the prison medical unit signed the death certificate on top. The funeral home received a transport authorization form with Department of Corrections letterhead instructing them to accept and prepare the deceased for burial. Franz's hand shook slightly as he turned pages. Talking quietly, he recounted what happened 10 months ago. The body arrived in a sealed transport bag with my name and prisoner number on it. The documentation indicated, closed casket only. No viewing due to the death. Though rare, prison fatalities involving violence or trauma were not uncommon. Marcus made plans and signed papers, but never saw the body. Prison officials requested the remains remain sealed for health and safety. Franz acknowledged this troubled him because he typically needed family identification, but the documentation was so formal and complete that he followed jail routine. Marcus chose a casket, approved the headstone, and paid everyone. Marcus, Leo and some friends attended the burial 4 days later. Franz showed me service images of my son clutching his father's hand near to the casket. So I asked Franz for copies of everything in the file. He paused, looking at the paperwork, my face, and my jail ID bracelet. Last, he claimed he would make duplicates because this whole situation felt terrible to him even then. The folder was copied at a corner machine, which hummed and clicked for several minutes. The transit authorization, death certificate, intake notes showing how the sealed body arrived, Marcus's invoice and everything else were slid across the table when he returned. I thanked him and departed before he reconsidered helping me. After returning to the shelter, I set out my release papers, death certificate and funeral home papers, property inventory sheet, and stopped mail log on an empty table in the common area. On the back of an envelope I wrote a chronology with a pen. Something happened 10 months ago that stopped my letters. My email password was changed by an unknown user at the same time. A prison doctor signed a death certificate the same week. My sealed body arrived at the funeral home days later. Marcus received official notice. There was a funeral. Family buried someone they thought was me. I did all of this in my cell, unconscious that the world thought I was dead. A social worker walking the shelter stopped at my table to inquire if I needed help. I told them I needed food stamps and emergency cash after being freed. I filled out various forms with her guidance. We received error notices when we submitted both applications online. My state database listed me as dead. While calling the benefits office, the social worker was transferred 3 times before giving up. She indicated support programs would not work until my legal status was resolved. I had the same problem getting a library card to use their computers. The librarian entered my name and SSN, looked at her laptop, and claimed she couldn't provide a card to a deceased state record subject. The systems I touched treated me like a ghost. My second night at the shelter, I wrote Marcus a long notebook letter. Missing letters on my property inventory, burial with my name, funeral home records showing a sealed body no one identified, blocked email account, and timing of events were all explained. I copied my release documents and printed grave images from my phone at a drugstore. Everything went in Marcus's name-branded envelope. I wanted him to see the evidence in writing without Sophia to intercept or explain it. Maybe seeing it all spelled out will help him comprehend that we both suffered. I checked Marcus's office address online the next morning. He worked at a downtown insurance company in a large office. I drove there and addressed the envelope to Marcus Lindholm's full name and company in the lobby mailroom. I left feeling like I accomplished something tiny but essential after the cashier took it without questions. Since my ID expired while in prison, I headed to the DMV to get a new one. I was in line for 45 minutes before a window. The clerk's countenance shifted as she input my information into her computer. She summoned a supervisor. The supervisor looked at the screen and then at me and stated they couldn't issue ID to a deceased person. I explained the prison error, but the supervisor insisted I settle my status with the State Vital Records Office first. I left the DMV with nothing, unable to establish my identity to any official system. A rundown structure near the courtroom housed the legal aid office on the third floor without an elevator. I descended the stairs with my folder of documents, my legs shaking after the DMV rejection. The waiting room featured plastic seats and outdated periodicals, but the receptionist was sympathetic when I told her I had a Nadia Keller appointment. A 40-year-old woman sat behind a case file-covered desk in a modest office. My throat tightened when Nadia rose up and shook my hand firmly, warm and reassuring. She grabbed a yellow legal paper from the chair across from her desk and started writing. I kept talking, spilling the full narrative while she wrote pages of notes. She probed about dates, times, prison conversations, and death certificate language. When I wrote about Leo remembering my smell and grin, she looked up from her notes with sorrowful eyes but kept writing. She never once thought I was insane or lying, even after hours. She informed me she had handled wrongfully convicted cases, but never one where someone was deleted from official records while alive. After I finished, the legal pad was half full, and she reviewed her notes before speaking. She stated that we needed to file an emergency petition with the court to confirm my identity and acquire a protective order to avoid arrest for being alive. Her voice was firm and professional as she explained the time frame, telling me it may take months and require proof. DNA evidence linking me to Leo and statements from pre-prison acquaintances are crucial. I nodded, trying to grasp while she opened forms on her computer. Her keyboard clicked as she asked me about my family and background. Do I have live relatives who could testify or contribute DNA? My sister lives 2 states away, I informed her. Our relationship was difficult, so we hadn't communicated since before incarceration. Nadia wrote that intricate relationships were still beneficial for DNA comparison. She opened a new window and listed all the proof I had. The release papers with their official stamps and signatures, the funeral home file showing the sealed body transit, the timeline of when my email got locked, and my stopped letters that never reached Marcus. She immediately categorized everything through typing. We needed more, she added without looking up from the screen. My complete jail records, including surveillance footage from the day I purportedly died. Medical papers confirming I was alive and receiving treatment. Visitor logs demonstrating I had contact with staff, and phone records showing my calls. She assured me she would file a Freedom of Information Act request for everything, rapidly typing the document. I requested any case-related documents and video from the Department of Corrections. She opened another document and wrote the prison warden a letter while that printed. As she wrote about evidence preservation and criminal offenses, she became formal and severe. She said she copied the State Attorney General's office because this went beyond administrative errors. A person with access to official systems knowingly forged records, a major offense. As each page came out, she signed it with a flourish and slipped it into envelopes as the printer hummed. Watching her work made me feel relieved and anxious. Someone finally did something instead of just telling me I was wrong or confused. After sealing and stacking the envelopes in her outbox for sending, she smiled at me. This is just the beginning, she said. But at least now you have representation and a plan. My folder was heavier as I left her office an hour later with copies of everything she filed, walking down those 2 flights of stairs. I finally felt like I could verify what happened to me since arriving at Marcus's door. I felt less panic and uncertainty after days of it. My lawyer believed me and fought bureaucracy. I used the shelter's emergency loaner phone to check the time on the pavement. Still afternoon, hours until dinner. A woman, maybe 35, with a messenger bag and a professional but polite grin approached me as I walked toward the bus stop. She identified as Freya Novak, a criminal justice journalist. She said someone at the re-entry facility noted my circumstance and wanted to hear my story. That Sophia might see my name in the news and use it to keep me from Leo made my stomach churn. Freya continued, explaining how media attention encouraged bureaucratic institutions to move faster since nobody wanted to appear incompetent. She promised to check every detail before publishing and protect my privacy while exposing the jail system. I examined her face to determine her trustworthiness. She presented a business card with her name, the newspaper logo, and links to her wrongful conviction and prison reform articles. I glanced at the stories on her phone and saw significant investigations that changed policy. I agreed to discuss, and we met at a coffee shop 2 blocks away where she bought me lunch while I repeated everything. After seeking permission, she filmed our chat on her phone and wrote notes in a coffee-stained spiral notebook. My timeline, documentation, funeral home, and sealed body explanations took 2 hours. When I showed her Franz's transport protocol file, she got excited and took shots of every page with her phone. This was highly unusual, she remarked. It's rare for a body to come sealed without viewing. It implies that someone with institutional power planned the cover-up, manipulating official documents and transport procedures. She photographed my release papers, death certificate, grave images, and everything. She packed up her notes and vowed to phone the Department of Corrections once we finished. She would ask officials about my issue and see what happened. She said their reaction would reveal whether this was a mistake or intentional. I took the bus back to the shelter, feeling vulnerable and worried about her article. Freya contacted me the next afternoon that the DOC Public Information Office had responded. She said their answer was quick and bureaucratic, saying they were looking into the matter but couldn't share inmate data. That's government speak for internal panic, she said, because companies only employ such language when they're trying to figure out what went wrong. 4 days after I sent my letter to Marcus's employment, an unknown number called the shelter's loaner phone. Something made me answer after I thought it was spam. Marcus, shivering and uncertain, asked if we might meet somewhere public to chat. He claimed he had read my letter at work and couldn't think about anything else. My palms trembled when I agreed to meet him in the coffee shop where Freya and I talked. After seeing all the information in writing without Sophia's protection, his processing changed. I hung up and stared at the phone on my shelter bunk, wondering if he was starting to believe me, or if he required more information before calling me crazy. My following afternoon arrival found the coffee shop almost empty, with only a few laptop users. Marcus was sitting at a corner table, and I could see he looked bad from across the room. Black circles under his eyes, crumpled shirt, and hair that looked like he'd been combing it all night. Paper-filled manila folder rested on the table in front of him. Sitting across from him, I watched him shake hands and open the folder. He laid out the death certificate, burial program, and jail letters in neat rows on the table between us like evidence at a crime scene. His voice was harsh when he finally spoke, questioning how this could be real if I was sitting in front of him. I pulled out my release documents with official seals and signatures. I showed him my paperwork's dates to show him when my letters and calls should have reached him. He looked at the papers for a while before saying something that made my chest tighten. He found it unusual when my letters and calls stopped coming, but the jail counselor stated I was withdrawing emotionally before the suicide. I was withdrawing from everyone to prepare, they told him. The counselor portrayed it as a familiar trend. Marcus grabbed his phone with shaky hands. He viewed his texts and faced me. My text from 10 months ago was fake. I couldn't handle prison anymore, so he should forget me and move on. I felt sick looking at those words because I never penned them. None of my texts were like that. I told him I didn't know how someone texted him from my phone. Clearly, someone did. Someone wanted him to think I quit. He felt I was leaving. So I asked him about the goodbye note the warden purportedly gave him personally. Marcus paled and groped for his wallet. He said he had carried it folded in leather for 10 months. The paper was mushy and crumpled from hundreds of folds and unfolds. He handed it to me carefully, and I read. The wording were inaccurate, but Marcus believed it since the handwriting resembled mine. The language was rigid and professional, unlike my writing or speaking. It said accepting my fate and finding serenity, which I never used. It spoke distantly about Leo, which made me want to scream because I never wrote that about my son. Marcus studied my face as I read. His eyes were changing, like he was now considering that I might be telling the truth. What did I need from him? He whispered. There was no point in avoiding it, so I informed him. I required DNA testing to verify I was Leo's mother. I needed him to stop treating me like a scary stranger trying to hurt his family. I needed his help to discover out what happened and who targeted us. He nodded hesitantly and agreed to the DNA test. He said that he needed time to think before involving Leo. He said Sophia was afraid I would damage their family. She was pregnant and frightened about my homecoming affecting her baby, Leo, and everything they'd built. He had to figure out how to manage it without scaring everyone. I wanted to argue for quick access to my son, but I kept calm. We typed phone numbers into each other's phones at the table. Marcus pledged to assist with Nadia's legal actions and not fight me over identity restoration. He briefly touched my arm as we stood up to depart. The rapid collision almost caught me off guard. He apologized for not believing me, saying the death certificate and burial felt real. Accepting my absence was easier than challenging prison records. I rode the bus back to the shelter in a stupor, mixed up, fatigued, and hopeful for the first time since this nightmare began. Everything changed when Marcus became an ally. Even if the way ahead was still rough and complicated, at least I had someone who believed me and could help prove my identity. Nadia Keller called 2 days later. Her news accelerated my pulse. After her official petitions and Freya's article, the Department of Corrections assigned an internal investigator to my case. Inspector Lucia Caruso from the Office of Inspector General wanted to talk to me. Nadia provided me the downtown government office building address and urged me to bring all my documents. Bureaucracy oozed from the gray concrete and glass edifice. Lucia Caruso met me in a modest third-floor conference room. Perhaps 40, she had dark hair pushed back and piercing eyes that saw everything. I was busy from the moment I entered. She turned on a tabletop recorder before we sat down. She probed my final months in prison with comprehensive questioning. Her questions included my daily routine, which cops worked my housing unit, and who handled my mail. She asked about my 10-month-old issue about missing outbound letters. She took careful notes whenever I answered. She used a corner scanner to duplicate my release papers, death certificate, funeral home paperwork, and cemetery photos. She was curious about which correctional officials had access to my housing unit and mail room. Her request was to write down every name and face I had seen in those final months before I was meant to die. After the nearly 3-hour interview, I was exhausted. I think Lucia Caruso liked what I gave her. She packed away her notes and recording gear and promised to update me on the investigation. She couldn't reveal what they found, but she promised to keep Nadia informed about my legal case. Lucia closed her folder and stared at me with an unclear face. She switched the monitor to show me something on her computer. My name was listed as deceased 11 months ago. Something seemed wrong as she clicked on the details. She pointed to the verified by field, which had only one name. Marta Varga, mailroom supervisor. Lucia scrolled down to show me my resignation date. 3 weeks after my claimed demise. Time made my stomach drop. I looked up Marta Varga to figure out why it sounded familiar. It hit me like a gut punch. Marta, the mailroom worker, constantly wore too much perfume and had long false nails that clicked on the counter while she sorted packages. I recalled her because she dated Tomasz Varga, a correctional officer on my housing unit. Varga had a thick beard and seemed angry when detainees asked him questions. As usual, jail officials treated you like you were invisible or ignorant, but I never had any serious issues with them. My grievance was filed 10 months ago. I wrote 3 letters to Marcus in a week because Leo's birthday was coming up and I wanted to send at least one. They never reached him. Marta got defensive and said the mail system was backed up and mails were lost when I inquired. Using the proper grievance process, I documented the dates I gave her the letters, and Marcus never received them. Her grievance went to her boss, but I never heard back. 3 weeks later, my outbound email was suspended for a fake regulation violation. Lucia Caruso watched my face as I recalled this. She instructed me to record all details concerning the grievance, including missing letters, interactions with Marta, and any information about Tomasz or other staff members involved, on a yellow legal pad and pen. Since the inquiry was continuing, she couldn't say more, but she said they were investigating whether employees lied to cover up mail theft or other misbehavior. I started writing and the words flowed. I wrote about how Marta usually seemed harried when I brought her outgoing mail and would throw the envelopes into a container without checking. I wrote about the grievance form I filled out and how I received a boilerplate letter indicating my complaint was rejected. I wrote about Tomasz's strange looks after filing the grievance, suggesting he knew something I didn't. I wrote about how my mail rights were suspended after that, and how I had to appeal to write to my family again. Marcus ceased responding to my letters by the time I got my rights back. I felt he hated me or had abandoned our marriage. I never thought someone would make me disappear from the system. I kept writing with a shaking pen. Inspector Lucia Caruso let me take my time, nodding sometimes when I looked up. I wrote what I remembered on 5 pages, front and back. She attentively read the pages and took notes on a separate pad. She then looked at me seriously and said something that chilled me. She advised me to avoid Marta and Tomasz Varga if they were involved. She warned that confronting them could sabotage the inquiry and endanger me. She stated anyone who would cover up their misdeeds thus far may do worse if threatened. Inside, I was shouting despite my pledge not to contact them. To disguise mail theft, these criminals stole my life, identity, and made my husband think I was dead. The thought made me want to vomit in her office. Inspector Caruso escorted me out and promised to update me on the investigation. She cautioned me against impulsively searching for Marta or Tomasz alone. I nodded and left the building, feeling weak. I couldn't concentrate at the shelter. Tomasz's mustache and Marta's clicking nails reminded me of how these two strange people had wrecked everything. Freya texted me that night. Her article was now online. I opened the link and saw the headline. Woman declared dead by prison system, fights to reclaim her life. She wrote it carefully, emphasizing the documents and systemic failings rather than the drama. She included interview comments, images of my release papers next to the death certificate, and concerns about how the jail system could lose track of a living person. The article was great, and I was grateful someone told my tale properly. The piece was spread on social media within an hour. I watched my phone fill with remarks. Most were appalled, asking, "How does this happen?" Some people were doubtful, claiming I was obviously a scam artist or mentally ill, and that there had to be a plausible explanation. Positive comments exceeded negative ones by a lot. Articles were shared and tagged news organizations and government leaders. All this attention seemed like it could be wonderful. Next morning, the shelter director called me into her office. She appeared anxious. She informed me someone called the night before and that I was dangerous and shouldn't be around vulnerable people. My caller said I was violent and unpredictable and placed everyone at risk at the shelter. The director claimed she didn't believe it because I'd been quiet and respectful since I came, but she had to take the threat seriously for liability and resident safety. She was apologetic, but she required me to find another place to stay. It felt like a gut punch. I grabbed my few possessions and contacted Nadia Keller outside the shelter. When I told her what happened, she sounded angry at the caller, not me. She said she had emergency legal aid cash to put me in a cheap motel for a few weeks while we found permanent housing. 3 hours later, I checked into a dingy motel on the fringe of town. The room smelled like cleaning supplies and smoke. The bedspread had unsightly stains, and the TV only had 4 channels, but it had a locked door and no one could tell me to leave. After weeks of shelter pandemonium and years of prison noise and surveillance, privacy felt like the greatest luxury. I spent a few minutes on the bed breathing in the solitude. Marcus texted me. Sophia was outraged by Freya's article, he said. She worried that reporters might visit Leo's house or school and cause disruption. He requested that I refrain from publicity until the legal issues were resolved. I wrote back that I understood and would skip follow-up interviews. I didn't tell him Freya had requested greater coverage. I didn't want to aggravate him and Sophia. 3 days later, Nadia called with news. The court scheduled her emergency petition hearing for 3 weeks. She advised gathering as much evidence as possible during that period. We required my DNA compared to Leo. My whole prison records proved I was alive when I was supposed to be dead. People who knew me before prison had to testify. I jotted down her long list of items to gather on the motel notepad. 3 weeks seemed like no time to prove my existence. Contacting my sister was Nadia's first priority. Anna and I hadn't spoken in almost 5 years since our big dispute about money I borrowed and never paid back before incarceration. I called her after 7 minutes of staring at my phone on the motel bed. On the 4th ring, she answered. Her voice seemed worn and older. She went silent for 30 seconds after I told her it was me. She started crying and asked how this was possible after receiving a letter from the prison priest 10 months earlier, indicating I had died. The letter had prison letterhead and everything. She regretted not attending the burial, but she was broke, lived 2 states away, and our relationship was so awful. I informed her about the bogus death certificate, Marcus remarrying, and Leo assuming I was dead. Anna told herself she should have phoned the prison to confirm, but she felt prison officials wouldn't lie about someone dying. She stated she had the chaplain's letter. She stored it in a family photo box. She promised to scan and email me immediately. I then addressed the difficult question. Would she offer a DNA sample to verify we were sisters and speak about our family history in court? Anna agreed quickly. She wanted to help clean up and apologized for not being there when I needed her. We talked for almost an hour about all that had happened in the years we hadn't spoken. She informed me about her divorce, growing kids, and grocery store employment. It was amazing to have relatives again, even those I'd been upset with for years. Anna sent the chaplain's letter scan over email after we hung up. The prison insignia and Chaplain Etienne Rousseau's signature made it look legitimate like the other false documents. I sent it to Nadia immediately. 4 days later, Nadia called to say she had arranged DNA testing at a state lab. The appointment was for 9 a.m. the next day. Marcus would bring Leo, and Anna was driving from out of state to offer her sample. I barely slept that night, worrying about seeing Leo in clinic again. In a downtown medical facility with white walls and fluorescent lights, the lab seemed chilly and unpleasant. Early I waited in the waiting area for Marcus and Leo. My son looked little, grasping his dad's hand through those glass doors. I purchased him his favorite dinosaur-themed blue shirt for his 7th birthday. After seeing me sitting, Leo stopped walking and stared. I smiled at him but didn't say anything because Nadia advised me the court's temporary order prohibited interaction during the appointment. The lab tech brought us back to a room with 3 chairs and a supply-covered metal table. She calmly told Leo it would be a brief swab inside his cheek and wouldn't hurt. Leo stared at me while she spoke, like he was thinking. Marcus protected Leo with his hands on his shoulders behind him. The tech rubbed the swab inside my cheek for 30 seconds to take my sample. Leo sat still and bravely while she administered his sample. I memorized my son's face since I didn't know when I'd see him again. Similar to mine, his eyes were dark brown with gold specks. He had a little chin scar from falling off his bike aged 5. I wanted to embrace him, draw him into my arms and never let go, but I sat with my hands folded in my lap. The tech tagged all tubes with numbers and barcodes after Leo. Leo asked me quietly about saying something after Marcus told him they may leave. Marcus nodded despite discomfort. Leo told me I smelled like his mama, which confused him. Marcus let him out before I could answer. Another 20 minutes passed while I waited for Anna. In the waiting room we hugged long after she arrived. Her eyes were the same despite her older, slimmer appearance. After taking Anna's sample, the tech said the findings would take 12 days with Nadia's fast processing. When I realized the science would establish I was Leo's mother and never perished in that prison cell, 12 days felt like forever. The 12 days in the motel were spent watching bad TV and trying not to get impatient. Inspector Lucia Caruso called on day 7 with investigative findings. She said prison surveillance showed me alive and wandering around my housing unit on my supposed death date. I was filmed in the day room, chow hall and cell. She also interviewed several women from my unit, who affirmed I was alive and well that week. Several people reported seeing and chatting to me the day the death certificate indicated I killed myself. Lucia sounded more serious when she continued. 4 days before my supposed demise, she found Greta home, an inmate who died of a heart attack or other medical issue. Since Greta had no family, her remains was released to the county for burial in the prison cemetery for single convicts. The worrisome element is that Greta's death and my fake death were too close together to be a coincidence. Lucia suspected the jail records might have misidentified me as deceased and buried Greta under my name. Thinking about some unfortunate woman buried in a grave with my name on the headstone made me nauseous. If Marta and Tomasz Varga were stealing mail, my Lucia explained her theory. Resentment 10 months ago could have revealed them. Greta's murder could have been an opportunity for them. By declaring me dead in the system, they could dismiss my concerns as clerical errors. Marcus stopped asking about missing letters after my death. I would remain in this bureaucratic nightmare after release. The whole theory made terrible logic and made me want to vomit. They declared me dead and buried someone else under my name to hide stealing mail and other dubious activities. Marcus stopped contacting the prison to ask why his wife hadn't responded. Dead inmates don't submit grievances, so mine would be dismissed. I asked Inspector Lucia Caruso about Marta and Tomasz Varga's fate if this notion is confirmed. Falsifying official records, mail fraud, and civil rights crimes might result in federal charges, she added. The jail administration may be liable for failing to catch such a major system error. Federal agents may investigate. Some may lose their employment. There may be lawsuits. Lucia said she had a good case but needed more proof to file charges. She searched for Greta Holmes' body transfer paperwork and interviewed more mailroom workers. She noted the investigations take time but were progressing. I thanked her and hung up, outraged that individuals would damage my life to cover their crimes, and affirmed that someone in authority believed my tale and was attempting to prove it. 7 days before court, Nadia Keller contacted my motel room at 8 a.m. State lab DNA findings arrived. She read the figures over the phone. 99.96% chance I was Leo's biological mother. My sister's DNA proved our relationship. My identification was clear to the lab. Nadia said she would file the results with the court within an hour and send Marcus's lawyer and the state attorney copies. After hanging up, I stared at the printed email confirmation she sent to the business center downstairs on the motel bed. Science confirmed my suspicions, but seeing those statistics made it true. My phone rang again 2 hours later. Screen displayed Marcus's name. I replied and heard him sobbing before he spoke. He kept apologizing, claiming he couldn't believe he'd buried someone else while I was alive. His voice broke as he wanted to meet again to discuss telling Leo the truth. I agreed immediately. We planned to meet at the same coffee place the next morning. Since Marcus finally believed me, I paced the motel room all day, wondering about seeing him again. I went to the coffee shop early the next morning and sat in the same booth. Marcus arrived 10 minutes later with a manila envelope. His appearance suggested little sleep. Sitting across from me, he slid the envelope. The images were from Leo's 8th birthday party 4 months earlier, which I missed because everyone thought I was dead. I went through the images one by one. Leo in a superhero cape, blowing out Batman cake candles, opening Sophia-owned presents in our living room. I wanted to scream seeing my son's face in those moments. I should have been there. Marcus started talking after seeing me gaze at the images. He said Sophia was struggling to accept my existence. She thought I was gone forever and formed a family with him. She was 8 months pregnant and worried about my homecoming and her marriage and kid. I understood why she felt that way, but it didn't change my needs. I told Marcus I didn't want to damage his new family, but I wouldn't leave Leo's life. Leo deserved to know his actual mother, so we had to find a way to live together, even if it was chaotic and uncomfortable. Marcus nodded and proposed supervised visits when the court confirmed my identity. That would allow Leo to adjust incrementally rather than all at once. Not what I wanted. I wanted to hug my son forever, but I agreed, since pushing too hard too fast could injure Leo. The court hearing was Tuesday morning. At 9 a.m., Nadia greeted me outside the courthouse. After security, we waited in a hallway for our case. The courtroom was smaller than imagined. The judge sat at a tall wooden desk. A state attorney sat at one table. Nadia and I sat together. Sister flew in and sat in the gallery behind us. Nadia stood and presented our evidence. DNA results showing 99.96% certainty I was Leo's mother. Prison surveillance footage showing me alive and moving around on the date I supposedly died. Franz Meyer's funeral home file showing the sealed body transport and irregular identification process. Lucia Caruso's investigation findings about Marta Varga and the suspicious timing of everything. My sister's testimony about our family. State attorney stood when Nadia concluded. He claimed the state accepted the facts and agreed to restore my identification immediately. The judge inspected her desk's documents. She had me stand and say my name for the record. "Elena Moreau," I shouted in court. Judge issued her order immediately. She said I was alive and all state agencies must change their records immediately because the death certificate was erroneous. She ordered supervised visitation with Leo while a complete custody evaluation was scheduled. I felt odd leaving the courts with formal documentation of my existence. On the steps outside, Nadia Keller hugged me after weeks of ghost treatment. She stated this was just the start. We had to seek accountability and obtain permanent custody. However, I was alive again and legally Leo Lindholm's mother. I'm done for today. I always attempt to give you more than a tale. If it provided you an idea or clarity, it worked. My family raised me to marry my cousin, at 18, to preserve our bloodline. Then I escaped, testified, and watched the FBI raid our house. My parents told me I'd marry my cousin Adrian Voss the day after graduation at 18, to preserve our superior bloodline through planned breeding. My mother, Margaret Voss, came from a wealthy Southern family that lived like the Civil War never ended, and believed they had leadership DNA. Father, geneticist Dr. Heinrich Voss, was fired from 3 colleges for his racial views, but continued his research in our basement lab. They collected family DNA and made breeding charts for our dining room walls when I was young. It was calculated that Adrian and I have the most founding stock genetics. Adrian was 30 and had trained me since I was 13 for cousin bonding. He'd drive me and tell me how glad he was to have me as his breeding partner and how many children we'd have. 5 minimum, he'd say while massaging my shoulder. Maybe 7 if your hips grew properly. My parents accepted these sessions and left us alone in the house for hours despite my discomfort. Mom dressed me up and told me to be sweet to my future husband before he arrived. They sent the dates to other genetic reservation families after choosing our family's historic property for the wedding. They prepared me for breeding at 18. Mom took me to reproductive system specialist Dr. Anton Kruger for childbearing approval. The doctor was no longer licensed, but my parents believed him because he shared their views on racial purity and genetic supremacy. The doctor gave my parents fertility tablets and a breeding calendar with my most fertile days. Adrian began visiting frequently and discussing our future children's genetics at family dinners. He stated, "Our firstborn will have the perfect Nordic features," as my parents grinned. "Selective breeding will revive this family." I tried telling teachers, but my parents believed I was mentally disturbed and lied for attention. Because they provided so much to the school, administrators didn't investigate. I begged my older brother Julian Voss for help, but he shrugged and said he married his second cousin 8 years before. Why the fuss? All the family did this dreadful thing and treated me like a marketable cow. Mom homeschooled my senior year to control me and prevent outside influence. She made me read genetic superiority books and quiz me on 11-generation bloodlines. I contemplated impossible escapes out my bedroom window for hours, suffering from loneliness. While searching for escape money, I uncovered my grandma Beatrice Voss's diary in the attic, changing my life. She documented decades of forced marriages and rejected females, corrected, preventing them from having children. A weird accident killed another cousin who loved someone outside the permissible genetic pool 3 weeks before her forced wedding. Names, dates, and photographs of wounded girls who resisted were in the diary. While helping others escape, My granny was caught and electroshocked until she lost their identities. Last entry cautioned ladies who found this. They will kill you before infecting lineage. Each page revealed more horror about my family's breeding scheme and wicked past. I reached one of the escaping cousins, Ingrid Voss, using a diary code and learned of an underground network that helped our family girls. She thought 9 years of masking her identity were worth being observed. Adrian's next visit, as my parents were preparing for the wedding, she took me up. The simple method, which needed precise timing, took days to memorize. They found the diary and escape plan. Adrian arrived that day with others. Medical equipment and his 2 relatives froze my blood. Dad stated the wedding was moved to tonight because I was unstable. Mum locked the doors. Dad removed leather handcuffs from a medical bag and said, "We'll do the ceremony first." Adrian smiled at me as he prepared a syringe for an IV drip. "Don't worry, cousin," he whispered. "The sedatives will make you more cooperative for breeding." 4 males blocked every exit as I backed against the wall. Mom held me when Adrian inserted the needle. He said, "Just a little prick. And then you'll be mine forever." I kneeled on Adrian's groin before my thoughts could catch up. He dropped the syringe and collapsed, moaning, as I escaped Mom and grabbed the diary. Dad charged me, but I dodged his arms and climbed the stairs 2 at a time. Mom shouted for my cousins to save me as Adrian groaned on the floor. As footsteps rose, I shut the upstairs bathroom door and wedged a chair under the latch. Dad ordered someone to get his garage tools as their weight rocked the door. My palms shook as I typed Elena Weiss's emergency number with our agreed-upon message on my phone. My practice run split the bathroom window, so I pushed it wide. I squeezed through the window frame and while Dad worked on the door hinges, dropped onto the garage roof after climbing the toilet and sink counter. Despite injuring my ankle, I leaped off the garden shed roof. The bathroom door broke above me, and Adrian shouted that I was in the garden. After years of solo exploration, I ran toward the tree line, knowing every path and hiding location. I followed the creek track into the dark woods because I knew it. Elena said she'd be at the old bridge in 6 minutes on my phone as flashlight lights cut through the darkness behind me. I knew this was my only opportunity, but each step tortured my. I have 3 aunts who tried to run away but were caught, and twisted ankle. Seeing the bridge without a car was alarming. Dad's truck's headlights appeared after branches cracked, not Elena's gray Honda. As he slowly drove past, lighting the trees, I held my breath behind the concrete bridge support. Adrian was directing the search pattern on his CB radio and telling someone to investigate the gas station down the road. I froze for another minute until spotting headlights from the other direction after the vehicle passed. Elena's gray Honda pulled up, and I hurried from my hiding place, leaping in through the back door. Before I secured the door, she gasped and we passed Dad's truck returning to the bridge. As our automobiles passed within feet, I lay flat in the back seat, frightened to breathe. Elena drove steadily for 10 minutes before letting me sit up. When we stopped at a truck stop 3 hours later, I shut myself in a toilet stall to read Grandmother Beatrice's diary again. Although the safe house sheets were moist, I read 4 states' addresses. Elena gently knocked, suggesting we relocate, and I recalled I left my phone in her car. Despite my ankle swelling in my shoe and severe leg discomfort, I followed her back to the Honda. As the mountains disappeared, she drove into the darkness discussing network rules. She said, "No contact with anyone from our past for 6 months minimum while they build a legal case. The safe residence will contain fresh IDs and a similar case lawyer. They knew how to hide us and have helped many girls escape households like mine." As the familiar countryside faded, I realized I would never return. Elena called while I ate scrambled eggs at a diner 3 states away the next morning. TV over the counter aired local news without mentioning a missing girl. I wondered if my family phoned the police or handled things internally, as Grandmother's diary suggested. Elena answered network calls outside because her phone rang often. She returned with a tense look and stated they were starting emergency protocols. My family had police ties in other states, and the network caught roadblock discussion. Changing cars and taking a safer route was important. Why preserve so many records if the family is wrong? Their atrocities are chronicled in the grandmother's journals, wall breeding charts and DNA samples. The network was busy protecting 4 other girls who escaped similar situations this year. Elena paid the bill, and we found a blue car with the keys under the carpet in the parking lot. Elena claimed 6 years of freedom as a survivor. Woman who left it left. We left the Honda for someone to pick up after relocating my luggage and diary to the new car. As we drove away, I imagined those other females fleeing Adrian and their family's breeding programs. Rich families with perverse beliefs coerced young girls into genetic reservation schemes more often than anyone wanted to admit, creating the network. Elena took girls from religious compounds and privileged houses like mine. We ran from breeders. 2 hours later, Elena stopped at a rest stop, and a state trooper's cruiser near the entrance made me sick. Police officers stood beside their cars, using their phones and watching passing cars. Elena saw him too and flinched, but she drove leisurely toward the parking slots. Stopping far from the trooper, she wrote swiftly on her phone with her head down. We departed walking normally despite my weak legs when she stated, "Bathroom." Elena grabbed my arm and held me as the trooper approached Elena's car. In the women's room, she led me beyond the stalls to a maintenance-only door she opened without stopping. Elena pushed me toward a minivan key-holding woman while glancing at the front door. Greta Lindholm started the van as we sprinted across the back lot. Greta drove slowly as Elena stared behind us, relaxing after 10 minutes. Greta left her family 22 years ago when they tried to make her marry her uncle. She said her parents reported Elena as a cult member who kidnapped females. The news dubbed me a brainwashed victim, and my parents sobbed over their daughter on every channel. These families often presented escapees as insane, so no one believed us. I was in a little apartment 4 days later trying to recall my new name, Clara Moreau. The network's lawyer, who wouldn't reveal her name, gave me a stack of paper and told me to write everything. She advised me to jot down the breeding program details while they were fresh in my mind. I kept writing about Adrian, supplements, and doctor appointments after 20 pages, even though my fingers cramped. The lawyer handed me my missing news on her laptop. Mom wiped her eyes and Dad cried for my homecoming, recorded perfectly by the camera. They sympathized and branded me selfish and ungrateful for leaving wonderful parents. Nobody wondered why an 18-year-old would flee nice parents on TV. A critic said I was probably on drugs, and another said, "Kids today don't appreciate good families." The lawyer said this was usual for families like mine that controlled the story. Mom was hospitalized from stress, Julian claimed over the burner phone. He begged me to call to let them know I was alive since Mom might not. Elena grabbed the phone as I went for it and listened to Julian. He changed tone and said they could find me with or without help when I didn't respond. We packed within an hour after Elena hung up since a burner may track the call. Greta took us to another safe home and told me her story in simple terms. Her relatives pressured her to procreate with her mother's brother at 15 to maintain their bloodline. Her 32-year-old daughter continued the tradition after she fled after giving birth. Numerous accounts of girls and women who escaped and failed were broadcast. 1 week after my escape, I was at my 4th safe place, unable to sleep since every sound made me jump. To remember why I ran, I checked the locks and read Grandmother Beatrice's diary. Isabel Voss returned for a basement wedding after 3 years in hiding. Her family sedated her for the wedding, and she had twins 9 months later before leaving. I wondered if Isabel was dead or locked in a family property with babies. The network doctor found a tiny ankle scar after I mentioned the vitamin shots. I don't remember surgery, but she said it looked surgical. The X-ray showed metal under the skin. The doctor went white when she discovered it was a tracking chip put during one of my checks. After removing it immediately, she noticed 2 chips nestled like Russian dolls. The first sent my location, but the second was inactive until she removed it. The monitor received a louder signal after a loud buzzer. The doctor predicted 30 minutes till help arrived, and the network went into emergency mode. I became cold seeing Dad's pickup at an intersection while Elena drove quickly to safety. 2 family were in the back, watching cars at the red light with Adrian in the passenger seat. Elena hit a parking structure and the tires screamed as we climbed the hill. We ran toward the stairwell, echoing off the concrete walls, after she stopped. Elena slowed me down as we hurried from the stairwell to the main floor to escape suspicion. The bus terminal was 3 streets away, yet every person we passed made my heart accelerate. Elena peered behind us as I pulled my hood up and tried to pretend my hands weren't shaking. Mom called from a corner payphone while I waited for Dad's pickup. We sped toward the Greyhound sign after she hung up. I stayed close to Elena while she bought my ticket with cash at the crowded terminal with suitcases. My driver's license had my photo but a different name and birthday, making me 21. Gate 12's departure indicator showed my bus leaving in 10 minutes. Elena walked me to the gate, then stared. "Remember the codes I taught you," she continued. She grabbed my shoulder and ran to the parking lot. I spotted Elena enter a different car via the window while waiting behind an elderly woman with heavy luggage. The bus driver took my ticket without looking at me, and I sat in the back to watch everyone. I watched Elena's car travel north while my bus headed south, pressing my cheek against the cold pane. As more passengers boarded, I lowered my hood to look for familiar faces. My knapsack held Grandmother Beatrice's diary on my leg after the bus left. I was alone for the first time since that basement night 10 days into my escape. The highway loomed ahead, so I opened the journal to a marked page. I felt uneasy reading Isabel's description in Grandmother's shaky hand. After escaping in 1989, she worked at an Oregon cafe for 3 years before her brothers found her. Grandmother heard cellar moans for 3 weeks after pulling her back. Grandmother found bloody sheets on the fire pile when Isabel never returned. Grandmother's comment that Isabel was caught pregnant by a non-bloodline ended the entry. I closed the diary and watched the miles, vowing not to become Isabel. My following bus at the Tennessee transfer station took 4 hours. I sat in a corner to monitor both entrances because the station was smaller than expected. I froze when my cousin Leon Voss questioned drivers near the ticket booth an hour in. He probably exhibited my photo and took their answers. My burner phone from Elena was in my hand when I silently entered the lavatory and sealed myself in. I mumbled when the network contact answered the second ring. I was told to buy a ticket the other direction, make 2 stops, and return tomorrow on a different route. After 20 minutes, I left without complaint. Leon remained at the ticket booth but faced away from departure gates. I bought a Memphis ticket and boarded as Leon approached my gate. I watched him inspect the other bus's passengers through the window as my bus left. 4 days later, I reached the next safe home, a modest ranch with an American flag. Talk about unwelcome family reunions. I was tracked like a lost pet instead than a woman who refused to marry her cousin. The responding elderly couple wore matching sweaters and smiled like wonderful grandparents. The wife served me tea while the father informed me they escaped breeding programs 45 years previously. I learned over pot roast that my family was part of a 14-state genetic purity network of thousands. The woman showed me her arm scars from her family trying to breed her with her uncle at 15. They retired to save girls like us and saved 14. Driven to court the next morning to file an emergency protective order. As I recounted the forced marriage and breeding program, the judge nodded politely. His face changed when I presented the family names. Shuffling papers, he said there was no immediate threat. In his argument of the order, I saw Judge Alaric Fontaine, one of Grandmother's related families from her journals. He knew who I was and what I fled. I felt confined inside the safe house despite their goodwill. The old couple insisted I was safe 2 weeks after my escape. Yet it seemed wrong. I wanted water at 2 a.m. and heard kitchen voices. The phone man's voice made me creep down the passage and squeeze against the wall. "Yes, we have Clara," he muttered. "The real one. No runaways with that name. We'll gently bring her in tomorrow after she trusts us." My blood froze, and I quietly went to my chamber. They were bounty hunters returning runaways, not network members. I grabbed my diary and backpack, opened the window, and left in pajamas, sprinting toward the street without looking back. Flashlights illuminated the yard as the rear door opened behind me. I ran harder as porch lights came on, hitting the pavement. I heard dogs barking and car doors banging at the home and saw an unlocked car in a driveway. I threw open the door and dove into the back seat, covering myself with a forgotten jacket. The elderly couple and 3 men searched yards and garages with flashlights through the window. After they gave up after 2 hours of searching, I hid until daylight because my feet were bleeding and I had no shoes. I escaped and walked to a library opening. The librarian barely noticed me as I headed to the rear computers. After entering Elena's codes on the network's emergency portal, I looked up the elderly couple's names and saw their images on the interceptor list. They caught runaways for 15 years as helpful grandparents, so they assumed I was caught after 3 days off the real network. Later, I read more of Grandmother Beatrice's diary about the decades-old false network in a study room. Some girls came home, but others disappeared. Families sponsored both real and fake escapes to catch runners. No one knew who was real anymore. Despite my family's gifts, Ms. Annalisa Hartman, my sophomore year counselor, was worried about me. She once asked whether everything was okay at home, but I was too scared to tell her. I dialed with a shaking palm and her recognizable voice answered on the 3rd ring. "My God, is that you, Clara? Your classmates think you joined a cult. Your parents say you fled with a religious group." I exhaled carefully and told her everything. The sentences were fast, and I could hear her breathing alter. After a minute of silence, she said she was coming for me. I started to tell her it was hazardous, but she hung up with a car engine starting before the connection went dead. I barely recognized her with her black hair and new clothes when she arrived in a beat-up Honda at daybreak. After 2 hours, I noticed the black SUV always stayed 3 Cars behind us in any lane. My heart raced for 3 weeks in that motel room while she drove 10 hours to her new teaching job. She looked in the mirror and turned her steering wheel knuckles white, but she calmly told me she'd been following my family since she saw bruises on my arms last year. She took photos and stored my essays about family life. Adrian's face appeared in the glass as Ms. Hartman took the exit toward the police station without signaling. Adrian followed us into the parking lot and got out of his car before we stopped. Inside the station, he played his worried cousin and told the desk sergeant I was mentally ill, and Ms. Hartman was a predator grooming me online. He showed the desk sergeant a folder with 4 doctors' reports of persecution complex and false memory from childhood trauma. Inspector Diana Moretti examined the documents while Adrian said my parents wanted their sick daughter back for psychiatric care. Moretti noticed that the dates didn't match, and 2 of the signatures seemed identical despite being from different doctors. Adrian's cheerful face dropped when she said she needed to question us individually in separate rooms. My hands shook so much I couldn't hold the diary as I showed Moretti each page. She paled when she read about Officer Carl Reinhardt, who returned my cousin Clara Voss 3 times before she disappeared. Moretti put down the diary and called Carl to ask about 5-year-old payment records and typical families. She shouted before hanging up and told me her ex-partner had admitted to taking bribes to repatriate fugitive girls. She started an official investigation and told Adrian he wasn't transporting me while she notified state authorities about trafficking. Moretti had 2 cops take Adrian away while she secured protective custody. The women's refuge had bars on the windows and a security officer who checked everyone in, but I couldn't sleep the first night. I clutched the journal closer with every hallway stride and read my grandmother's final entry. Trust no one. Always have an exit. Moretti returned the next morning with federal agent Elise Dubois, a cult deprogramming and human trafficking expert. Dubois had seen similar breeding operations in other states, but my grandmother's diary was more detailed. She photographed and submitted every page as proof, revealing how medical specialists and law enforcement controlled these networks across state lines. Dubois put me with a verified foster family while they blamed my parents. No one supervised me, had me memorize bloodlines, or measured my hips for breeding. Madame Keller showed me a bedroom with actual windows and internal locks. I was enrolled under a protective identity and tried to focus on derivatives in calculus class, while the girl next to me whined about her parents not letting her go to a party. My family's breeding calendar predicted I would be pregnant with my cousin's child by now, but she didn't know. Luca Meyer asked if I wanted to go to homecoming because he thought my life was normal. One afternoon, Julian stood across the street from school, watching me walk to the bus. My security detail approached him, but he held a cardboard sign. Despite everything they'd done, I doubted her fate, so he knew how to make me doubt everything. Agent Dubois brought recordings from my parents' phones from the investigation warrant to the foster home that night. Dad was talking about retrieving their breeding stock, me, and Adrian was explaining the basement protocol for forced insemination. Ms. Hartman dyed her hair black and changed her style to help me. How did she know to conceal herself before picking me up? 3 days later, Dubois called me at the foster home to report the FBI raid results, which included sedatives, leather restraints, and breeding calendars for 12 girls in their network in my parents' basement. 3 pregnant teenagers said they were there freely, but Dubois saw Stockholm Syndrome in all of them. When they discovered how many families were involved in this breeding enterprise, the investigation expanded beyond my situation. I watched the news in the Kellers' living room as my parents protested religious persecution outside the courts. Mom lamented government overreach destroying European families, while Dad told reporters they were targeted for their traditional views. These senators supported them on TV, calling it an attack on religious freedom and parental rights. I realized how powerful this network was when protesters outside the courts held signs supporting family rights and traditional marriage. 7 weeks after my escape, Mrs. Keller taught me how to cook normal dinners without genetic optimization rules. As we made spaghetti, I explained how every meal at home had exact protein ratios and fertility-boosting vitamins to boost offspring production. Like Mom, she listened without judgment and gave seconds without calculating calories or asking about my reproductive health. Elena informed me through Dubois that she was preparing a case with 20 other network escapees to testify together. 2 girls recanted due to family pressure, and another fled last week. Generations of wealth and legal ties gave the network's lawyers infinite power. My deposition was next month after the Kellers' garage was spray-painted liar and all the front windows were damaged. A note in the mailbox threatened worse if I testified against my family and their sacred customs. I couldn't let the Kellers suffer for wanting to foster me, so I begged Dubois for another placement. I met Sophie Lindholm, who had fled 6 years earlier and was hiding in a guarded location with other witnesses. Sophie showed me abdominal scars from her corrective treatment after rejecting her arranged marriage at 16. They tried to remove her ovaries to prevent bloodline contamination, but she escaped mid-surgery while bleeding. 2 months after my escape, I had insomnia and obsessively checked facility locks at night. I refused the therapist's anxiety medication because I remembered my parents' fertility-disrupting supplements. I read Grandmother Beatrice's diary often, finding comfort in knowing someone else had survived and helped others escape. Adrian was released from attempted kidnapping and conspiracy charges within hours using religious freedom monies. He appeared on TV in a clean suit and claimed to be freeing me from indoctrinated sex traffickers. A supervised Keller's phone call made peculiar clicking sounds. According to financial data Dubois found, the breeding network placed judges, police chiefs, doctors, and politicians in many states. The FBI found my calls were traced despite security safeguards, indicating law enforcement was informing families. I had 2 hours to collect my few items and say goodbye to Sophie. 3 weeks later, Dubois drove me to the federal courthouse in a bulletproof SUV with 2 other agents. Metal detectors at every entry and guards checking ID twice made the building look like a concrete fortress. Dubois took me through the basement parking garage and up a special elevator, telling me Adrian would watch in the gallery. When we entered the courtroom and saw him in the 3rd row, wearing his nicest suit and staring at me, my hands started shaking. Adrian watched me as the prosecutor took me to the witness stand to swear on a Bible to confess. Adrian shook his head when I told them about the sedatives he brought to make me cooperate. I described genetic computations and ideal mating schedules on our dining room walls to the grand jury, who took notes. My voice trembled when I mentioned finding Grandmother Beatrice's diary and my aborted escape plot when caught. After 3 hours of testimony, Dubois brought me back through the tunnels to avoid reporters. She said Julian was arrested that morning for trying to bribe a federal official with 600,000 euros for my location from an offshore account linked to dozens of genetic reservation families in 14 states. Federal authorities tracked every transaction and froze accounts while making hourly arrests. I shared my story with 3 other girls who had left similar families at the witness facility in the common area. Teresa Falk joked about making t-shirts that said, "I survived a breeding cult," making us laugh for the first time in months. After comparing medical exams and breeding patterns, we found our family used the same unlicensed doctors. Teresa fled to a homeless shelter when her family tried to breed her with her uncle when she was 16. Another girl showed us scars from her father branding her with a family crest to identify her as breeding property. We laughed at horrifying events while eating microwave popcorn late at night. 4 months after my escape, Mom cried on a conservative talk show while showing my infant photos and telling the host the government took her daughter. She wore her nicest church dress and held a tissue. The host criticized traditional families and religious freedom. Counter-protesters surrounded the witness facility with my school photo placards demanding my return to my family the next morning. Security deployed guards and cameras everywhere, but the crowd grew larger and angrier each day. Seeing freedom through bulletproof windows made the walls feel like another jail. Dubois arrived that afternoon with paperwork linking my family to 6 unusual deaths over 40 years. 3 names from Grandmother Beatrice's notebook stood out, including a cousin who fell below the week before her escape. When examined together, the patterns were clear, with similar injuries and illogical timings. Dubois warned me that having the FBI exhume bodies for more autopsies could endanger my family. That night, a black car idling outside the facility ran for hours, and tinted windows obscured whoever was inside. Security said they couldn't do anything unless someone left or threatened, but we knew who. Sophie gently evacuated the emergency exit and into a waiting black SUV during a fire practice 2 days later. Security footage showed her glancing at the camera before entering, as if to suggest it was her choice. 2 days later, Sophie's family released a video of her sitting in her childhood bedroom, saying feminists brainwashed her. She repeated her lines about wanting to go home with hollow eyes, like they'd poisoned her. The prosecutor called an emergency meeting to warn me that Sophie's recantation could ruin our case. 3 more witnesses refused to testify or return FBI calls after family contact. Defense counsel claimed a government scheme to undermine religious families retaining their traditions. All news channels disputed whether we were victims or liars trying to harm our parents' reputations. 5 months after my escape, my parents uploaded my childhood medical records, including psychiatric evaluations, online. Adrian calling me a liar in court, while I explained his sedatives was odd for a righteous person. I wondered if he knew it was wrong but only cared about the family. The evaluations called me insane and prone to making up claims for attention, but they didn't identify the network doctors served. Within hours, #Clara is lying trended as people analyzed every word to prove I was crazy. Strangers sent FBI tip-line death threats, saying I deserved what my family planned. 2 weeks later, Ms. Hartman, my old teacher, testified, and I watched from behind the prosecutor's table as she pulled out a large folder of photos she'd taken since I was 14 and placed them over the evidence table, showing bruises on my arms from Mom grabbing me during breeding lectures and marks on my neck from Adrian's grasp. Her defense lawyer asked how she got these images and why she never reported anything to Child Services if she was afraid. Ms. Hartman said she had tried 3 times, but my parents always had evidence indicating I was clumsy and wounded myself. The lawyer also mentioned her 10-year-old DUI and said she took images of a student for other reasons. After court, I met with a trauma psychotherapist who worked with cult escapees. She said my constant door and window checking was normal for PTSD, and that she still jumped when someone knocked on her door 20 years after escaping her family's religious group. The next morning, Elena testified via video link from a location the FBI wouldn't disclose for her safety. The defense objected every 30 seconds to her evidence that she helped 20 girls escape over 6 years. Elena listed dates, places, and girls who'd run away, including 3 from Adrian's family. She showed recordings she'd made for years of network members discussing breeding programs on her phone. The prosecution played Elena's recordings in court, and Adrian's voice was clear. What would happen when they got me back? When Dad discussed failing breeding stock and what happened to women who couldn't have children, the courtroom quieted. 2 jurors cried as they left after the judge requested a recess. 3 days later, the judge needed federal security to continue the trial due to death threats. 2 jurors requested an excuse, saying they were worried about their families after dead animals were dumped on their doorsteps. The defense requested a mistrial, saying media publicity prevented a fair trial. I watched everything I fought for crumble as the judge reviewed their motion. 5 months after my escape, I took online programs to finish high school while 2 FBI officers monitored surveillance cameras in the living room, and I did math homework at the kitchen table. Writing a constitutional essay was uncomfortable because I realized my family had perverted freedom to mean they could do whatever they wanted to their daughters. Julian contacted the prosecutor one morning to negotiate. He and his lawyer described breeding schemes in 45 states with shared genetic match databases for 6 hours. Some families swapped daughters like baseball cards for the best genetics. His statement showed that hundreds more families were doing the same thing as my family. After Julian told them about 3 corrective sessions she directly observed on resisting girls, Mom was arrested on conspiracy charges the next day. She was freed on home arrest with an ankle monitor, but her court photos showed her with unkempt hair and crumpled designer clothes. Elena called me crying about Sophie, a network girl, being discovered dead in her apartment while I was doing schoolwork. Elena knew Sophie would testify about her family's breeding operation next week, but the police ruled it suicide. We both knew the place might have been ours. Adrian wasn't supposed to contact me, but I woke up to messages from a fake social media account with photos of me at the foster home, walking into the courthouse, and doing homework in the safe house kitchen. The FBI went crazy trying to figure out how he got these images while I was under constant protection. They found a tracking device in my backpack and suspected my family was following me. I moved between safe houses every few weeks for 6 months while the FBI investigated who was leaking my location to the family network. After Agent Victor Hahn was found sending information to his wife, a German breeding family member, everything had to be transferred again. Running, packing, and never being safe exhausted me, but stopping meant they'd find me and haul me back. Or worse, Julian called me from a strange number the morning they moved me to the 5th safe house, to tell me Dad was found dead in his cell, hanging from a bedsheet, despite being on suicide watch, with a shaky voice. Dad had agreed to testify about the network's leadership for a reduced sentence, but he died within 12 hours. The guards claimed suicide, but the timing was too perfect, so the investigation split between murder and suicide. I and Julian had to tell the jury that the defense was poisoning, as the prosecutors tried to preserve their case without Dad's testimony. The defense lawyers hired experts on false memory syndrome and mass hysteria to explain how siblings could create shared delusions to explain family trauma. After a long day of testimony that portrayed me as a mentally ill child seeking attention, Dubois found me crying in the courthouse washroom. She sat on the dusty floor with me and revealed she'd been pulled from the case after her family was threatened, but Mom testified in a black dress and pearls the next week, blotting her eyes with a tissue as she told the jury I'd always been problematic and they'd tried everything to help me. She provided medical records from doctors I'd never seen, therapy notes from sessions I never attended, and medicines I never took. Her portrayal of a widow and mother who lost her husband to suicide and her daughter to mental illness was the jury deliberated for 3 days while demonstrators called me a brave survivor, or a liar on the courthouse steps. Despite not eating or sleeping, I read Grandmother Beatrice's diary in my hotel room, finding strength in the stories of women who had faced the same battle. On the second day, a juror was sent images of her kids at her house with a note about keeping silent. 2 days later, Julian called me from the hospital with his jaw wired shut after 3 men jumped him in protective custody and battered him until his spleen exploded. He refused to recant his statement, despite evident terror in every syllable. I visited him the next morning and held his hand as machines beeped around us, reminding him why we were fighting and that backing down meant they'd won. Later that day, I sat in a courthouse restroom cubicle listening to 2 women at the basins discuss our case like a performance. One said I was lying for attention because no real family would do such horrific things, while the other said her daughter made up stories when she didn't get. They laughed about wild teens as they left, and I realized how ridiculous our truth seemed to regular people who hadn't seen what families do behind closed doors. That afternoon, the foreman read in a trembling voice that Adrian was found guilty of attempted kidnapping, but not conspiracy. We presented boxes of evidence, but Mom was acquitted and the breeding network accusations were rejected for insufficient proof. The room swirled as the judge thanked the jurors and sentenced Adrian to 6 years, likely out in 3 with good behavior. Julian being jumped in protective custody with a burst spleen but refusing to back down showed the family's obstinate courage in the right way. Mom smiled at me from across the courtroom as her lawyer rubbed her shoulder and Adrian's lawyer discussed appeals. Dubois grabbed me outside the courthouse and put a flash disk in my hand before leaving without saying anything. I found every FBI document about the breeding network that night, including family emails about pairing relatives for best genetics. Le Monde contacted me 3 days later to clarify details from leaked documents. I knew Dubois had distributed copies to multiple news outlets. 3 more females who escaped years earlier called reporters with stories of forced cousin marriages and breeding calendars, keeping my phone ringing. 2 days later, Mom announced a religious persecution case against the government at a courthouse press conference in her nicest suit and pearl necklace. She said the payment will assist other traditional families defend their constitutional rights to arrange marriages. 4 teenage cousins I recognized from family gatherings stood behind her, and my stomach fell knowing they were next in line for breeding assignments. That afternoon, a 60 Minutes reporter asked me for an exclusive interview about my escape and the network. Dubois warned me that going public would make me a target, but concealing hadn't worked. I accepted and spent the next week gathering proof, including Grandmother Beatrice's diaries and Mom's breeding records. 8 months after my escape, Ms. Hartman delivered my high school transcripts in a manila envelope to my apartment. She convinced the school board to award my diploma based on completed homework, despite everything. I cried on my couch holding that paper because I had done something they never wanted for their breeding stock. The next week, 60 Minutes crews turned my living room into a studio with lights and cameras. I displayed the breeding charts and my unlicensed doctor's reproductive system exam results on the coffee table. When I opened Grandmother Beatrice's notebook to the sections about females who refused breeding missions, the interviewer paled. After the Sunday night interview with 15 million viewers, my phone flooded with notifications. Some called me brave, while others threatened my life and accused me of betraying my ancestors. 3 congresswomen launched breeding network investigations the next morning, and everyone wanted to talk about cousin weddings. Mom said on a conservative news program that I was mentally ill and taught by liberal professors to hate my ancestry. After seeing the interview, more survivors contacted me, including a 14-year-old girl partnered with her uncle. Elena cried because 4 girls had contacted her after hearing my story and made plans to flee. We spent hours on the phone planning safe houses and creating phony identities for females whose families would find them. 3 weeks later, the prison called to inform me another convict had stabbed Adrian in the shower and killed him. Adrian was recruiting white supremacists for the breeding network, so knowing one fewer predator may attack females like me was liberating. After the interview, the FBI raided 14 network families and removed 14 children, including a 14-year-old whose parents chose her husband. I watched the news from my flat and saw the same horror in those kids' faces as the night I ran. The prosecution had enough evidence this time to arrest Mom for conspiracy to abuse children and trafficking them for reproduction. After hearing about the network's witness disappearances, the court denied bail. Mom in her orange jumpsuit at the arraignment, not the immaculate matriarch who had run my life. Other network families turned on each other to get lower sentences, and the sick system collapsed. The prosecutor called to say 17 more people, including Dr. Kruger and many family patriarchs, had been arrested. Julian, my older brother, was arrested for transporting minor cousins to breeding meetings across state lines. As more survivors revealed similar breeding operations, the probe expanded to other countries. Within 8 months, most of the generations-old network's leaders were arrested. Julian was placed in witness protection by the marshals and relocated to Northern Europe with a name I didn't know, after testifying against the family in the ongoing trials. A month later, the prosecutor wrote me a letter apologizing for everything, for being too weak to protect me when he knew. He wrote that he was in therapy to figure out why he chose comfort above right. After weeks in my desk drawer, I could read the letter without shivering or forgiving him. I kept it. 8 months later, Congress made compelled genetic matching and breeding operations federal felonies with prison terms. I was astonished to see my name in the news with Capitol building photographs as Clara's Law. Lobbying damaged it, but it still protected other youngsters. My professional objectives led me to major in social work in the fall of college. I tried not to cry when reporters asked how it felt to change history while standing with 12 other survivors when the president signed it. My roommate heard my story from the news but never made me feel unique or upset. We studied and criticized teachers like normal students. Nightmares and jumping when someone touched me were common, but my therapist said it was normal after everything. After a 9-month trial, the jury convicted Mom on all charges in 3 hours. She said she was defending our family's legacy until they handcuffed her after the judge sentenced her to 27 years. She stared at me one last time as the bailiffs led her away, but I watched my phone. She wasn't my mother anymore, and hadn't been for Elena and I founded a legal group to help kids flee our homes, using what we learned underground. We had lawyers, safe houses, and FBI-free protocols. Grandmother Beatrice's journal network became real with business cards, funds, and a website. In twice-weekly therapy and a green office with comfy seats, I learned about PTSD and trauma responses. I still checked every lock 3 times, sat with my back to walls at restaurants and scared men when they got too close. My therapist reminded me that healing was not linear and some days were harder than others. She was right. Some mornings I couldn't get up and others I felt normal. One night, a young relative I'd never met called my emergency phone and said her parents were preparing her marriage to a 30-year-old. I activated our network and helped Elena call her state's authorities. 3 days later, she was secure in foster care and her parents were investigated. Rescues stopped the cycle again. I had never visited Grandmother Beatrice's grave before that spring. I carried fresh flowers and the diary that saved my life and many others. I sat on the lawn and told her about the network collapse, the new rules, and all the females who were free because she had written everything down. I finger traced her name on the granite gravestone and praised her for revealing the truth even when it was hazardous. The victim support group met every Thursday in a church basement to share stories. I told fresh escapees with the same haunted face that it gets better, not flawless or simple, but better. Always saying, "You're free now, and that's everything that matters." They cried, and I held their hands and remembered being 18 and afraid I'd never escape. Mom still thinks she's preserving their heritage after 27 years. How does the brain interpret breeding plans as protection? My roommate brought me coffee and joked about our statistics professor looking like a perplexed owl while I studied for a social work exam in my dorm room at 20. Students outside my window went to class without reading charts, genetic preservation meetings, or forced marriages. I was 20, single, childless, and free to choose my own future, exactly what my family never wanted. The diary was on my bookshelf with my textbooks, reminding me of my roots and why I would fight for every female still used as breeding material. I answered another emergency call from a cousin in Germany immediately. This was my life, decision, and purpose that nobody could take away.